It happened at a moment when no one expected disaster. Destruction came without warning, and it marks the beginning of the League. A deadly game called the League was suddenly initiated by beings from the universe, and as the League developed, humanity was destroyed. But everything was fine. People thought they had to succeed in the last round and turn everything around. However, when that very last round arrived, no miracle happened, and as a result, humanity lost. At that time, the territories were divided into zones, and each zone had its own administrator. For example, Seoul was the second zone, and its administrator was a certain G. The administrator expressed his admiration for the people, because he didn't think they could go so far. But no one cared anymore about what he said. It was the day when the last hope of humanity died, and no one was able to fight anymore. If people had managed to win the final round, they would have been given the chance to reverse everything. That was the reward the system offered. However, in the final round, the boys reached their limit and were defeated. The administrator merely said that in the end, this is the end of the destroyers, and in the meantime, they should be grateful that the universe paid attention to them. Finally, G also said that he could fulfill one last request, if there was one. It would be a reward for their efforts. The girl, the last survivor, asked him for a chance, one last chance to change everything and start over. But G, laughing, replied that it was not in his power, because only the gods could fulfill such a wish. As a result, the final 8th round ended in defeat, and the strongest faction of people perished. This meant the failure of the League. However, not all is lost, even when it seems that there is no light ahead of the tunnel, but only deep darkness. Suddenly, Jaehi, formerly known as the Sword Star, was able to reincarnate in the past. Jaehi couldn't believe what she saw with her own eyes. After dying on the battlefield, she woke up in her one-room apartment. Grabbing the phone, she finally became convinced that she had been transported back 10 years, to the day the League appeared. This surprised the girl even more. She already had enough questions, and the most important one was how this happened. Jaehi was confused because G had said that such a request was not in his power, but at the same time, if she was able to return to the past, then her partner Kang Shion was also alive. Casting aside all doubts that this was a dream, Jaehi went to look for Shion in order to explain everything to him before the start of the League. After all, no matter how many strong players you manage to gather, the League is a war of factions. And getting this far without the one who is closest to victory, the great monarch of the expanses, Shion, is impossible. That's why Jaehi wanted to start the League with him from the very beginning, and then the two of them would finally be able to end it. Meanwhile, Shion was an ordinary young man who worked part-time at a construction site in Anyang City, which was located in Manhwa County, Gyeonggi Province. And the young man was very different from the others, largely due to his stubbornness, determination, and also kindness. Regardless of the task that lay before him, he continued to work to complete it, overcoming all the difficulties in his path. Shion is now only 20 years old, and instead of studying, he works hard to provide his loved ones with a comfortable life. Others asked him why he had given up on his studies, since with his brains, he could easily have entered a prestigious university. But Shion only replied that universities don't put food on the table. Meanwhile, he is left completely alone, and he needs to take care of his younger brother named Junho so that he does not feel second class. Shion was sincere and honest, which made him respected by many, and his hard work also earned him extra pay. The young man was surprised that he received his salary for the day so early, since he still had time. But the boss replied that he had already done his part. And besides, today was his brother's birthday. Afterwards, Shion went to the Onyx shopping mall to buy a gift for his younger brother, who had just turned 13. Since he would be starting middle school soon, a sweatshirt would have been a good gift. But the price tag was 119,000 won with a 30% discount. This purchase was a kind of luxury for Shion, because 120,000 won is his daily salary. Buying it means not having to pay for food and electricity for a month. Shion thought about buying the sweater in the same place as the windbreaker. Then it would only cost 30,000 won. But Junho probably wouldn't like that it was from the market. At the same time, Junho called him, asking him to take home some chicken since it was his birthday. Even though it was quite expensive for Shion, he told Junho that he would of course buy any chicken he wanted for home. In addition, he also decided to buy him a sweater from a well-known brand. Because, after all, Junho's birthday only comes once a year. Meanwhile, Shion wanted to double-check whether he really had 120,000 won. But the saleswoman thrust a bag of clothes into his hands and wished him well. The young man was surprised when he looked at the new clothes because he had never bought anything like this before that cost more than 100,000 won. Shion was about to go get some chicken and return to Junho's house, but on the way, he noticed something was wrong. Everyone was crowded together. And all because the elevator wasn't working. In addition, the escalator was also under repair, so Shion decided it would be better to take the stairs before it was too late. But suddenly, something strange started to happen. The stairs were also blocked, and strange black smoke was coming from them. Shion also suspected that something was wrong, and that the black smoke had nothing to do with the fire, since there was no burning smell. Opening the door slightly, Shion was even more surprised when he saw something truly strange in front of him. Something that didn't look like smoke from a fire. In an instant, the door closed, and Shion felt as if someone had pushed him and slammed the door behind them, and this frightened him even more. To top it all off, the store closed due to black smoke, but no one was going to evacuate the people inside, and the mobile phone service was also down. At that moment, the very destruction occurred, and a system window appeared in front of everyone. In it, people were notified that they were currently connected to the second zone, and humanity itself was defined as a species destroying the cosmic ecosystem, according to Resolution 87,493 of the Space Union Assembly. And in accordance with the resolution of the meeting, the human population on Earth must be reduced without fail. This marked the beginning of the League. The system also stated that all humans, except for the necessary population, would be destroyed. And according to the Constitution of the Space Union, this necessarily applies to all living beings, and the destroyers have no right to refuse. And all the destroyers must prove their worth in the League, where only players have the right to participate in it. This caused a stir among people. Everyone was very scared, and no one wanted to believe what was happening. The first impression of the League was almost like Asura. Chaos reigned all around. Endless fires and destruction began, and alien monsters appeared on Earth. Faced with an incomprehensible situation, confronted with chaos, people could only flee helplessly. At this time, Shion was speechless from what he saw and could not even move. However, what he was most worried about at that moment was Junho, who was now left completely alone at home. Since the elevator was broken, the power was out, and the emergency staircase next to the elevator was also closed, Shion decided to try to climb the broken escalator. However, black smoke also entered there, which left Shion confused and in a hopeless situation. But the young man had no intention of giving up, and, gathering his confidence, he decided to find a way to get out of the shopping center at any cost. Meanwhile, monsters, goblins, appeared in the shopping center's parking lot, which was located on the second underground floor. The goblins themselves were not strong, but the people were so frightened and weakened that they did not even think of trying to resist the monsters. As a result, even before the official start of the League, a quarter of humanity was destroyed, since no one dared to fight back against the monsters in order to try to survive. And all because humanity hesitated for a moment in this unprecedented, extreme situation. Therefore, the very first ironclad rule that Shion taught the newcomers to his faction was, if you want to live, move without hesitation. After all, if you don't do this, you will end up dying yourself without ever having tried to fight death. Now it is the turn of the current Shion to follow this rule. In the future, they are not a challenge for him, but now they seem to him an unprecedented horror. It will take Jaehi about 2 to 3 hours to climb all these floors and find Shion to finally meet him. At this time, Shion himself was trying to get out of the shopping center in order to survive and return to his younger brother. Having reached the last exit, which was also blocked, Shion almost lost faith that he could get out of this horror. At that moment, other people were also trying to go down the escalator, and no one understood that even trying to escape from here was useless. Meanwhile, Shion saw someone strange in front of him, a girl who was very different from other people. In an instant, the stranger dispersed the black smoke as if nothing had happened. Walking up to the crowd, she greeted everyone, saying that today was a wonderful day, and asked them to focus so that they could finish quickly. The stranger introduced herself as Administrator K from the Space Ecosystem Management Bureau. She explained to everyone that they had been selected through the Union by very important beings as a destructive species that must be destroyed. This, in turn, means that they have become objects of the policy of destruction, saying that she is also ashamed of this, but this is policy, and if it is ordered, then it must be done. Afterwards, she was asked if she couldn't just let them go, saying she looked more like a madwoman, and her joke dragged on. This surprised her quite a bit, and she responded to their words by saying that it seems that not everyone noticed an opportunity when it was right in front of them. However, she respects their right to choose, and even with the extermination policy, there are still laws that respect the rights of species that violate nature. Therefore, if someone agrees with a policy of destruction, they need to switch to 0. And if they do not agree, they need to switch to X. and if they choose X, then they will not have to participate in the League, and they are given 5 minutes to think about it. After this, everyone rushed to Zone X as one, because they did not agree with the extermination policy and thought that by choosing this option, they could avoid death. Only Shion chose to stand on 0, thereby agreeing with the policy of destruction. Of course, the young man did not agree with such a crazy policy, but this option was definitely the right one. The others tried to dissuade him, saying that he had just signed his own death warrant and that he should reconsider joining them. At that moment, something even stranger happened. The administrator addressed Shion, calling him a player, but it was a voice in his head. She explained that no one but him could hear what she was saying because it was a private conversation. She noted that he had pleasantly surprised her by choosing this option on his own, and in the meantime, she made him an offer. If Shion managed to make most people change their minds in the remaining time, she would reward him with a pleasant reward, and there would be no punishment for failure. Shion was amazed beyond belief. He didn't think that such a thing was possible. All these strange things that he had seen so far. If all of this was real, then everyone who chose option X could really die. So Shion decided to try to convince the guys that the correct option was 0, unless they wanted to die while staying in X. But no one took his words seriously. Moreover, they considered him a madman because they were sure that the obvious right option was not to agree with the policy of extermination. However, the young man did not give up, saying that they all received a message from the system that from now on, people would be destroyed, and they had no right to refuse it. On top of that, it also said that progress in maintaining the necessary population is called the League, and they are not against the policy of extermination, but against the so-called League. In simple terms, Shion meant that he too would like the whole annihilation story to be fake, but if it was true, then option X would be immediate execution. There must be people in the crowd who have realized that the world has changed, but they simply bet on leaving rather than staying. But if the stake in this game is your life, you will have no choice but to change your mind. After the time ran out, the couple who had chosen to the last to abandon the policy of destruction died. Shion should have been momentarily relieved that he had managed to choose the right option and convince the majority of his opinion. But what was happening frightened him even more. Meanwhile, the administrator told Shion that he had won, especially for a moment. His aura was very intriguing. And as she promised, she gave him a reward. Shion has received a firearm in his inventory that is prohibited before the start of the League, but it is given to him as a reward. He only has 10 bullets, and if they are not sold, he will not find them anywhere else. This raised even more questions in Shion. He asked her if they would have items to sell separately in the future, but she only replied that everything has its time. In the end, she only said that weapons were very expensive in this world, so he should be more vigilant. Meanwhile, goblins had finally made their way onto the floor where Shion and the others were, and were attacking the people one after another. The administrator announced that the so-called training had begun, and advised people not to stand still, but to fight for their lives. Meanwhile, the monsters continued to kill one after another. Shion was confused and didn't understand what to do. Could this really be the so-called chance to survive? However, the young man did not want to give up, and was thinking about how to find a way to survive. At that moment, one of the goblins approached him. In an instant, he attacked him and managed to hit him, and if Shion had not dodged at the last moment, he would not have gotten off with a simple cut. Meanwhile, he also noticed something surprising. After the goblin was knocked down, he still couldn't get up. The monster also dropped its dagger, and Shion then realized that he actually had no choice to survive except to fight the new world. At first, he was tormented by doubts, and he did not understand how he could take on such a thing, since he had never done anything like this before. And he even thought that perhaps there was another way. Shion didn't understand why others went on trips after their college entrance exams, so why was he going through this? And on Junho's birthday, no less. However, he did not want to die, and could not leave his younger brother alone in such a world. That's why Shion made the choice to fight to the last, and show no mercy to the monsters. After he killed the monster for the first time, he was overcome by a strange feeling, as if he could still feel the goblin's heartbeat in his hands. But no matter how painful and unpleasant it was, Shion couldn't waste time on this, because if he wanted to get out of here, he had to kill monsters. At the same time, everyone tried to survive as best they could, and did everything they could to avoid fighting the monsters. Shion, watching this, was surprised why the goblins kept falling. Was it possible that their weakness was their legs? As a result, Shion's guess turned out to be true. Despite their agility and strength, goblins had one weak spot: their legs. Once you knock them down, they won't be able to get up again, and finishing them off isn't that hard. After that, he told everyone to move to the side if a goblin was running towards them. It was enough to simply jump to the side from the direction from which they were running. And after the monsters are on the floor, you need to finish them off with something. The young man's determination and resourcefulness surprised the others more and more each time, and they began to wonder who he really was. One of the crowd decided to get to know Shion, telling him that he was truly incredible and that they had survived thanks to him. It was a man named Kwon Kyung-soo, who had served in the Army Special Forces for a long time. It was also advantageous for Shion to move with Kyung-soo, as he was a former soldier with a strong physique. But now, it was much safer not to get close to anyone. Meanwhile, Shion decided not to say anything special about himself, only said that he saw the goblins crashing into objects and falling, unable to get up. Then he thought that they would have a chance if they took advantage of it. Kyung-soo then asked him if he had any plans after this on how they would repel the goblin attack. Shion noted that since they didn't have time to think right now, and most of them were in shock, he needed help. Even if it was just Kyung-soo, since they don't know how many more monsters will come to them, it was necessary to build some kind of defense in the form of barricades to at least somehow protect themselves from the monsters. They will knock down the monsters with rods when they try to climb over the obstacle. However, they also need to hurry because the administrator called this training, and if this was the end of the training, she would have appeared by now, so there will definitely be more monsters. Kyung-soo was surprised by the boy's intelligence because everything he said was very logical, and although he seemed like an ordinary student, he was remarkable in many ways. Seeing Shion and Kyung-soo building barricades, the others were also inspired and began to help them in any way they could. After some time, the goblins began to make their way towards them and were already on their way. But there was something even more surprising. Behind the monsters, there was a strange silhouette in a cap, who dealt with them without much difficulty. At that time, Shion didn't know that this unknown girl would soon become his partner. He was just surprised by how easily she killed monsters without hesitation. His first impression of Jaehi was quite strange. He noted that at the moment it was she who was the monster, not the goblins. Jaehi told him not to let his guard down, which made the young man even more surprised. Was she really talking to him? She then stabbed the goblin, saying that goblins have excellent regenerative abilities and can recover from minor wounds in a few minutes. Shion asked if she knew much about these monsters, and Jaehi replied that she did, as she had encountered them before. Jaehi also informed them that from the second basement to the 7th floor, most of them were littered with corpses. This surprised Shion even more, as the fact that there were almost no survivors on the lower floors meant that she had fought her way through the monsters to the 7th floor alone. Shion decided to keep her at a distance for now, but after Jaehi mentioned his brother, his reaction immediately changed. After that, he immediately took out a revolver and pointed it at her, asking how she knew about his brother. Jaehi tried to keep the atmosphere calm and asked Shion to go somewhere else to talk. After they moved to a more secluded area, Jaehi introduced herself and told him that this was her second life. She understood that it was hard to believe, but nevertheless asked him to believe that she was from the future, and they already knew each other. In a past life, they met about 5 years after the start of the league and reached the last round. Then countless players joined forces with them, some for money and power, some for freedom, and some fought fiercely only for their king. And then they became the strongest faction. But in the end, their strength was not enough, and they suffered defeat in the final round. That's why Jaehi came to meet him in advance, because Shion was the monarch of the strongest faction in the previous league. She stated that she also wants to end this crazy game as soon as possible, and if they join forces from the very beginning and rise together, then this will definitely be possible. Despite her words, Shion replied that he was not interested. And besides, everything she said sounded quite absurd. Jaehi asked him if he didn't want to save his brother, and this made Shion angry for a moment. She also added that the first round was already supposed to start elsewhere, and they would only be able to leave if they held the first round at this mall. Jaehi also told him that the monsters he had seen earlier were nothing compared to what was to come. And even if he was lucky enough to escape and find Junho, it would be extremely difficult to survive. She was willing to help Shion and noted that she understood the absurdity of what he said, but nevertheless, he needed her help to find his brother and survive. Shion noted that Jaehi seemed to really know a lot about him and asked him who the person he most wanted to kill was. It was a secret Shion hadn't told anyone but his closest friends. But Jaehi knew the answer to that question. That person was Aunt Shiona, a truly sinister figure he wished to forget. Shion was surprised because he never talked about his aunt. Did he really trust Jaehi so much in the past? And meanwhile, he decided to stick together with her, asking her not to act recklessly. The young man had one more thing he wanted to know, and it concerned his brother. He asked Jaehi if he had managed to protect Junho until the very end. However, Jaehi replied that when she met Shion, he was already alone, and she had never met Junho in the past and had not heard from Shion that he had died. Or, to be more precise, no one dared to ask him about it, because when she joined his faction, the young man was already an emotionless man, and then everyone only made guesses about his brother. After all, this was a world where everyone had lost a family member at least once. For Shion, that meant that while he was locked in the mall, Junho might have already died. However, he did not give up prematurely, and together with Jaehi, they returned to the others to quickly get through the first round and go in search of Junho. Meanwhile, the administrator appeared, joyfully congratulating everyone who had survived the training, noting that they had proven that they deserved to live, and that this was a step towards proving their worth. She also announced that all survivors will now rise through the league as players, and hopes that they will become worthy players to watch. After this, the administrator announced the completion of the training, as well as the official start of the so-called league. At first glance, it seemed that she was doing this with good intentions, and no one had any suspicions about what was happening. However, in an instant, the face that had seemed angelic changed to a demonic one, and the announcement of the first round of the league was made. It was a royal game where there are 3 teams and 3 kings, and people have to fight each other to survive, and whoever protects their king will win, and there will be only one winner. The game's unique feature was that if the king died, all of his citizens also died. And every night from 11 p.m. to 12 a.m., there was a truce, during which any military action was prohibited. The condition for victory was survival. Meanwhile, people would be divided into 3 teams. A king would be chosen for each, and if he died, the whole team would die with him. And the king of the red team, which included everyone on the 7th floor, was Shion. The administrator was also pleasantly surprised that it was Shion who became the king of the team, because who, if not him, is best suited for this role? The king can see the status window and information about his team, but he cannot see the data of other teams, so even if they meet, they will not know who is the king. The first round itself will begin in just 10 minutes, at exactly 0000. And until then, they can do whatever they want. The administrator also said that since it had come to this, they should really enjoy it, because the one who had the most fun would win. The king selection in the first round is based solely on the system's judgment, and if the starting point is a building, it's easy to end up on the same team, so Jaehi wanted to find Shion as quickly as possible. However, a king is a completely different thing. The system is amazingly good at choosing the best people for this role, so Jaehi was worried that she herself would become a king, but this did not happen. Meanwhile, she thought that perhaps the system had a way to identify potential monarchs, but everything turned out fine, because Shion became the king of her team. The first round of the royal game may seem simple at first glance, but it is a necessary course for a future monarch of the apocalypse. It's sort of a phase of identifying the key players who will get artifacts in the second round. And while the starting position is small, it's something they have to overcome. At that moment, guys from another team, the blue team, came to them, although at first glance it seemed that they were from the black team. At first they seemed quite friendly, as they immediately offered to help by bringing food. One of the strangers introduced himself as Kim Dong-gil, saying that he was from the 11th floor and was also the manager of the branch of this shopping center. Dong-gil noticed that there were barricades on the 7th floor, which meant that there was someone smart on the red team too. However, the 7th floor only contained clothes and household goods, while the 11th floor was a food court. So the blue team had no problem with food and weapons, and Dong-gil's first priority was to find the king. Shion, approaching him, menacingly asked Dong-gil why they actually came here. Dong-gil replied that they had come to share food, although he was already running through the scenario of killing Shion in his head. Shion asked him why this was, since everyone had heard the explanation for the first round. Dong-gil tried to gain their trust, saying that it was foolish to trust the words of these crazy terrorists in times when cooperation was the best option, and in the meantime, asked to call their king to reach a compromise. The young man understood that Dong-gil only wanted to find out who the king was so he could kill him as soon as midnight struck. Shion took out a revolver and pointed it at Dong-gil, saying that if they wanted to cooperate, the next time they should come with their king, or better yet, not come at all. Dong-gil was very scared when he saw the revolver, and then the rest of the blue team rushed at Shion. But at that moment, Jaehi intervened and instantly knocked the weapons out of the enemy's hands. Then her sword was at Dong-gil's throat, and Jaehi asked why he accepted the league's rules. In the end, Dong-gil accepted defeat and retreated, no matter how sad he was. Shion continued to be amazed by Jaehi's dexterity. She subdued 2 grown men in an instant, hitting only their knife-wielding hands. He couldn't trust her words about his exclusivity, but Jaehi clearly possessed an overwhelming power. After this, Shion announced that they were moving the base to the first floor, which caused a violent reaction from the others, as it was full of monsters. Shion explained that they couldn't move far from the blue team's base, so they would go down to the far end of the first floor and gather the other members there. The blue team is probably well prepared, because if Dong-gil is the manager and has security guards with him, then they have a big advantage. So Shion decided to increase the distance between the teams and prepare for battle, even though it wasn't enough. Understanding this, he asked Jaehi to go on reconnaissance missions to the blue team and gather as much information about them as possible. Returning to base, the guards said they could not accept defeat and suggested attacking, but Dong-gil said the decision was now his. Jaehi managed to find out that the real king of the blue team was hidden, and Dong-gil was pushed forward, which made the task more difficult. Shion also told her that if she found the real king, she would have to kill him immediately. Jaehi promised to help, but added that this did not mean that she would do everything for him, but orders must be followed. Meanwhile, the guys from the red team managed to get some food from the goblin's flesh. It tasted disgusting, but there was no other choice. It was better to eat something than to die of hunger. It was the second day of the first round, and there were 39 people on the red team. After the blue team left, the red team immediately went down to the first floor, and the first thing they saw there was a mountain of torn human bodies that needed to be removed. Moreover, the cuts were too clean and did not look like blows from monsters. Apparently, it was the black smoke that prevented people from escaping from the 7th floor. And those who tried to escape were simply blown apart. Whether it was the League or the Royal Game, Shion wasn't sure everyone could accept it. However, there were no survivors on the floor, and those who saw the bodies agreed to remove them without hesitation. The team also managed to obtain water, which they collected from the bathtub, and a little more food. Dried goblin meat, which Shion entrusted to Kyung-soo to prepare. Shion and the others were busy with the barricades, asking those who were tired to rest, although he himself also needed rest. However, he did not want to slow down, and was eager to improve his level of training as quickly as possible. At the same time, he was thinking about how to get a weapon, because soon they might encounter people worse than monsters. The blue team had kitchen knives, but they only had goblin daggers, which broke quickly. At this time, Lee Ju-yeon seemed to have created something new, with her brother Lee Se-bum by her side. Jaehi had mentioned them earlier. Ju-yeon succeeded in creating the Goblin Spear, a powerful weapon that replaces the dagger, and a status window appeared that was visible only to Shion. Since the older members of the team were more comfortable using spears, Shion asked Ju-yeon to make a few more. Se-bum also joined in, which Ju-yeon was happy about, saying that the 3 of them could do it in 2 to 3 hours. However, at that moment, Shion lost consciousness, or rather, fell asleep, and had a nightmare. It was a dream from his past, when he wanted to commit suicide, unable to accept his fate. But then Junho saw it, and crying, asked why he was doing all this. Shion then realized that even though he didn't have support from his parents, he still had a younger brother to take care of. He woke up in a cold sweat to find Ju-yeon and Se-bum standing next to him. Se-bum said they tried to wake him up, but he was sleeping so deeply that nothing worked. Meanwhile, the rest of the guys continued to work, somehow keeping themselves busy. Shion asked why he was doing something unnecessary, and Se-bum replied that although it was rude, it was still somewhat useful, especially considering the team's composition. Se-bum also said that Shion slept all day, and the young man felt uneasy. After all, during this time they could have been attacked, and the location of the black team was still unknown. Ju-yeon tried to cheer him up by telling him that he needed to relax a little, as stress was of little use. And at that moment, the administrator suddenly appeared, frightening most of the team with her appearance. Meanwhile, she also noted that all this looks pathetic and unbearably boring, and therefore, to speed up the process, they start the special game. From this moment on, for the next 4 hours, any of the 3 teams that fails this special game will face severe punishment. This is how the special game of Capture the Flag began, and to complete it, you had to capture your team's flag. The blue team's flag was on the 3rd floor, and the team itself had about 89 people. The black team's flag was on the 6th floor, but nothing was known about it. The red team's flag was on the 9th floor, and they had only 4 hours to capture the flag. Of course, many people did not like this sudden change and did not want to participate in it. This is how a man from the crowd expressed his indignation. but the administrator instantly killed him with just a snap of her finger. She stated that from the very beginning, the royal game was designed to destroy other teams, so they couldn't just stall for time and stay safe. This incident caused fear among those around. No one could believe that everything was happening for real. Shion tried to remain calm and in a fighting spirit, telling the boys that they were heading for the flag because they needed to focus on the game just like they had when they were among the monsters. Of course, many would have preferred to stay in a quiet place, but Shion explained to them that there was no safe route. And besides, Jaehi was not with them now, and there was no point in hoping that someone would protect them in their place. Meanwhile, Shion's plan was not to immediately capture the enemy team's flag. At the same time, Kyung-soo and some of the guys were foraging for food on the 7th floor, so that they would have at least some food. Out of the corner of his eye, Kyung-soo also noticed armed guards from the blue team, who were currently hunting the red team members. Once they realized that the red team members were not on any of the floors, they headed to the 1st floor to strike first. Meanwhile, Kyung-soo told the boys to quickly go down the emergency stairs, grabbing as much dried meat as possible, and he would try to drag the rest himself. Meanwhile, the blue team had already gone down to the 3rd floor where their flag was located. But not everything was so simple. The flag was guarded by a monster, and in order to take it back, it had to be defeated first. The rest of the team hesitated and were frightened, but Don-gil demanded that they capture the flag at all costs. Of course, the weakest members of the team, from whom no one expected any benefit, were chosen to play the role of the monster's victims. Despite the boys' attempts to refuse, they were thrown right at the monster's feet like cannon fodder. In an instant, the monster opened its mouth and ate one of the team members as if nothing had happened. Suddenly, white smoke appeared from somewhere, which surprised the others, and no one understood where it came from. After some time, the boys realized that the smoke was coming from a fire extinguisher, but it was too late. Someone had fired it stealthily. Don-gil tried to take control of the situation and ordered the team not to lose heart, but to attack in response. However, it was already too late. Attacks were coming from different sides, and no one could keep track of them. However, they were able to understand that they were not being attacked for the flag, but it was too late. The red team's fire extinguisher unit had already done its part of the job. In addition, a unit of throwers was created, who attacked enemies with goblin spears. Meanwhile, Shion formed a 3rd unit of crossbowmen who attacked from afar using wooden crossbows. He came up with a similar plan half an hour before the attack began. Since the blue and red teams were closer to the opposing flags, Shion reasoned that if they went up or the blue team went down, a clash would be inevitable. And that was the point of this game. That's why he decided to postpone capturing the flag, because first he needed to group up. Only one team would survive in this shopping center. He then instructed 3 of the boys to gather fire extinguishers to create a smoke screen near the blue team's flag. The rest were assigned to a combat group, whose task was to destroy the enemy using weapons they had made themselves. With everything around him covered in smoke, Shion decided to take advantage of the moment to drastically reduce the enemy team's numbers. However, he did not want to go ahead. The young man wanted to suddenly stab one of the enemies with a knife so that they would completely lose their minds in the wake of alarm. Meanwhile, one of the blue team members finally managed to reach his flag. But before he could capture it, he was suddenly attacked by Shion, which he did not expect at all. Meanwhile, Kyung-soo and a couple of the guys went up to the 9th floor, where the red team's flag was located. Their mission was to investigate the situation on the flag floor, but as soon as they got there, they saw the flag monster being brutally beaten by members of the blue team. This really surprised them. They seemed not to be afraid of the monster at all, as if he were a punching bag for them. Meanwhile, Jaehi remained in the shadows, plotting her sudden appearance. Meanwhile, on the 3rd floor, the smoke began to clear, and as soon as it became a little clearer, Don-gil saw many corpses of his team. 53 of them remained. Don-gil was amazed that there was not a single member of the red team among them, wondering if they had killed each other in the smoke. However, what surprised him most was that the red team never took their flag with them. Don-gil realized that their original goal was not to capture the flag, but to kill as many team members as possible, which enraged him. After that, he took the blue team's flag and ordered everyone to immediately go to the 9th floor. Following this, a status window appeared stating that the blue team had captured their flag, and Kim Jong-paul, an elite fighter on that team, also saw it. Meanwhile, Jaehi arrived with Jong-paul and his company, holding a canister of gasoline in her hand. The boys were surprised when they saw her, but didn't pay any attention to it. But as soon as Jaehi threw an open canister with a lighter at them, the situation changed radically. After this, Jaehi began to mercilessly deal with her enemies, killing them one after another. She didn't care who was in front of her. She saw them only as enemies who needed to be killed. Watching this, Jean-Paul couldn't believe his eyes, because Jaehi seemed fragile in appearance, but in fact, she dealt with several elite fighters at once in an instant. As a result, Jean-Paul was so stunned and let down his guard that he didn't notice how Jaehi had already approached him. After this, a status window appeared, stating that the red team had retrieved their flag, and Don Gil ordered everyone to immediately go up to the 9th floor. As soon as they reached the 9th floor, they saw not only a fire, but also a crowd of corpses of their comrades. At the same time, a status window appeared, stating that the black team had also taken their flag, and Don Gil's anger grew even stronger. He was so angry at the red team that he wanted to kill them all at any cost, leaving no one alive, and meanwhile ordered everyone to immediately go to the 1st floor. Shion at this time was also surprised that someone managed to get their flag. However, Kyung-soo told him that it wasn't his doing, and he didn't know who actually took their flag. However, with all 3 teams having claimed their flags, it was now all up to the royal game again, and Shion opened the map to see enemies approaching them. After this, he ordered everyone to immediately take up arms and stand ready for battle, because a real bloody mess would begin very soon. At this time, the administrator happily watched what was happening and could not take her eyes off the monitor. Moreover, the situation suddenly escalated, and Shion was on the verge of death, as was his entire team. However, the situation changed gradually. First, Don Gil and the others penetrated the 1st floor, and he was so angry that he even killed members of his team who expressed dissatisfaction. Anger overwhelmed him so much that he turned into a real bloodthirsty monster, forgetting about everything human. Don Gil didn't listen to anyone, even though the blue team had already suffered losses. Meanwhile, he continued to manipulate the others, saying that the red team was to blame for all the troubles, and if they defeated it today and killed the king, their lives would change for the better. This somehow lit a spark in the hearts of the others, and they blindly believed Don Gil that they could get out of here alive if they followed. After this, they all rushed to attack the red team, but they had already defended themselves with barricades. Moreover, when the blue team tried to break through the barricades, the red team did not allow them to do so, immediately attacking. The red team's cohesion was many times higher than the blue team's. They trusted each other and fought not only for their own lives, but for the lives of others as well. However, Don Gil continued to order them not to stop, claiming that even if they were hit by spears, it would not kill them. It was important for the red team to preserve their barricade fortress, because if the enemy destroyed it, they would undoubtedly win. Shion tried his best to maintain the advantage, but in an instant, he let his guard down and didn't notice how one of the enemies grabbed his leg. Following this, he took out a knife and was ready to kill Shion. The young man tried to convince him that he was not the king, but the enemy did not care. The situation was critical. No one could help Shion because there were too many enemies. As a result, the red team's fortress fell, which meant an immediate victory for the blue team. However, no one from the red team thought of becoming discouraged, much less giving up, because everyone wanted to survive. Don Gil was trying to find the guy with the gun at this time, considering him to be some kind of key. After that, a shot rang out, and Shion appeared behind the falling body, holding a revolver in his hand, with a knife stuck in his leg. However, Shion needed to be more reasonable because out of 10 bullets left in the revolver, there were 8 left. At that moment, Don Gil realized that Shion was the king of the red team and ordered an immediate attack on him. Shion denied that he was the king, saying it was someone else, but Don Gil was no longer convinced. After this, all of the blue team's forces were thrown at Shion and those who were trying to protect him. Shion became excited and forgot about the limited amount of bullets, firing the revolver over and over again. As a result, there were only half of the bullets left. In addition, another enemy was approaching Shion, but he could not aim properly because he was too exhausted. The young man tried to stall for time as long as possible, but it was difficult, especially since the situation was extremely difficult for his team. Shion wanted to kill Don Gil with one shot, but as he was taking aim, he was attacked from behind and knocked down. He managed to throw the enemy off with difficulty, but he took out a knife and was about to pierce Shion. But at that moment, Kyung-soo appeared and killed the enemy from the blue team, because he was also angry at what was happening and did not understand why innocent people had to kill each other. The rest of the blue team, thinking that the red team's king had fallen, considered it a victory. But it was not so. Even though Shion had no strength left, he remained conscious. Shion tried to reach for the revolver to try and kill Don Gil, but someone else got to him first. However, that person turned out to be Juyeon, who at that moment was asking Shion to immediately get up and not give up. But Shion didn't even have the strength to hold the weapon, and meanwhile he remembered Juyeon's words that she used to be a soldier. As soon as he stood up, he asked Juyeon to shoot Dong-gil, as he wasn't sure he could do it himself. Juyeon wasn't sure she could do it either, but she couldn't help but try. Meanwhile, Shion was attacked from behind again, and an attempt was made to grab him. The young man managed to knock the enemy to the ground, and Juyeon was about to rush to his aid, but he told her to focus on Dong-gil. The enemy strangled Shion, blaming him for all the troubles that had happened to them, saying that only by killing him could they survive. At that moment, a shot rang out, followed by another, and in the end, there were only 3 bullets left. Hearing the first shot, Dong-gil realized she was aiming at him and tried to hide behind the bodies of his teammates. However, it was already too late, because Juyeon was a soldier not only in words. Her first shot hit one of the blue team members, and her second hit Dong-gil right on target. However, he was still conscious and ordered the others to forget about him and instead catch Shion and kill him. Only then could they end this hell. But in reality, it was all over for the blue team, because at that moment, Jaehi arrived at their side and, holding a sword to Dong-gil's throat, asked where their real king was. After this, the most difficult stage of the special game finally ended, and when Shion lost consciousness, Jaehi carried him to a safe place. Shion woke up on the 11th floor in the cinema, where the blue team's headquarters had previously been located. The first thing Shion did was immediately ask what happened to the blue team, but Juyeon replied that first he needed to calm down and rest a little. She told him that Jaehi had turned the first floor upside down, all in order to find the real king of the blue team. Jaehi single-handedly dealt with the entire team, including Dong-gil. But nothing happened, and she went in search of the real king. The king wasn't on the first floor, so the guys went up to the 11th floor to get Shion to safety. And then a status window appeared saying that the blue team's king was dead. As it turned out, it was hidden behind a locked door deep in the cinema. But the guys managed to find the key, and there they discovered the king's corpse, who apparently died of starvation. So now the main task was to find the black team and finally finish the first round. The main problem was that nothing was known about the black team, neither their location nor the number of members. This meant that the king of the black team, as well as its members, could be anyone from the red team. At first, Shion began to suspect Jaehi and Kyung-soo. Meanwhile, Jaehi and Jung-soo went on reconnaissance to make sure all the enemies were dead. Kyung-soo asked her if it was really necessary to check everything so thoroughly, to which Jaehi replied that perhaps one of them belonged to the black team. Kyung-soo tensed up a little after her words, but said that it was at least worth showing a minimum of humanity. To this, Jaehi replied that he himself had already killed someone before. She noted that he killed to survive, and those people also tried to kill to save themselves. So if he wanted to absolve himself of blame, it would be better to look for the guilty among others. Kyung-soo didn't share her opinion, and began to wonder if he would become the same if the game continued, because then he wouldn't know what to do. Meanwhile, Shion continued to theorize about who on the team might be the traitor. He had no leads, as the black team had only been active once, during the flag game. Then most of them were on the first floor, and only 2 people were not there. Jaehi, whom he sent to scout, and Kyung-soo, who was walking towards the flag while he was preparing the meat. At the same time, Saebum told Shion that after he fell, Kyung-soo repeatedly asked him for a revolver. Shion didn't understand why Kyung-soo needed the revolver, but in the meantime, he began to suspect Saebum, asking why he was only talking about it now. Was it really to distract attention? Although Saebum had other intentions, he did not continue the conversation and simply left. Meanwhile, Jaehi and Kyung-soo were slowly returning, and in the meantime, they accidentally overheard the conversation between Saebum and Juyeon. Saebum asked Juyeon to stay away from Shion, because now he suspects everyone, and if something happens, he can immediately kill. Overhearing their conversation, Jaehi realized that an internal split had begun within the team, but she decided to remain silent for now. As soon as they returned, Shion noticed that Kyung-soo looked worried. Jaehi wanted to talk to Shion about the black team, noting that their king was definitely among them since there were no other survivors left. She also expressed her opinion about Kyung-soo, pointing out his behavior and requests for a revolver since he had a lot of time for solo action. Shion replied that the same could be said for her. Even though he had sent her to keep an eye on the blue team, she had plenty of time alone too. Also, for some unknown reason, Jaehi was the last one on the battlefield, and he asked if she could prove that she wasn't the king of the black team. Jaehi became agitated because she didn't understand why the accusations were suddenly directed at her. More interesting was Kyung-soo's behavior, which had changed dramatically. as if he had become different since he had been wandering alone. It was as if he had changed completely since he started staying alone in the mall. Kyung-soo invited Shion to smoke together, but he replied that he didn't smoke. Kyung-soo said that he would smoke himself then, and told me that he had already quit smoking, but when he couldn't find any cigarettes, he thought he would go crazy. He found a pack of cigarettes in the coat of a dead schoolboy, and at first thought it was an accident. But later, he began to think that it was planned by someone. After this, Kyung-soo's behavior changed again. He threw down his cigarette and immediately reached for Shion. Shion wanted to shoot, but didn't have time. Kyung-soo had already grabbed him. The situation had escalated rapidly, and no one knew what to do. And besides, Kyung-soo himself seemed to have no idea what he was doing. He admitted that he was the king of the black team, and then said that to win, he had to survive 6 days, and there were only 10 minutes left. Shion asked him if that was the case, then why all this drama, since Kyung-soo would only need to sit quietly to survive. Kyung-soo noted that, as expected, Shion was once again engaged in what was called thinking. He told them a story about how, as a soldier, he had been in situations worse than this, and even when he was in the middle of a rain of enemy bullets, he never thought it was hard because he thought risking his life to save others was cool. However, when the damned royal game began, and he became the king of the black team, everything changed radically. Then the administrator simply told him that there was nothing surprising about this, since in such games, a third team is always needed to add tension. After these words, she disappeared in an instant, like a ghost. And from then on, real hell began for Kyung-soo. At first, he planned to sacrifice himself at the right moment, when he would be helping Shion. But upon hearing the order to raise the flag, he suddenly decided to change the course of his game and went for the black team's flag himself. When he captured his team's flag, he realized that there was no turning back, and no matter how disgusting it was, he also wanted to survive. At the same time, he thought that he could save even more people if he got out. But looking at how Shion remained cold-blooded and constantly thought only about survival, without asking questions about the game itself, Kyung-soo fell into a stupor. And when he experienced this feeling himself, he realized that in this crazy game, the right ruler was not him, but Shion. It was strange and even funny to Kyung-soo that people were dying so that others could be saved, since it was obvious that this would continue even if they got out of here. Kyung-soo considered this place a real hell, and wishing the others good luck, declared that he would get out of this hell. After that, a shot rang out, but the bullet flew not at Shion, but at Kyung-soo. Kyung-soo couldn't live in a world where he had to kill to survive, so he committed suicide. After this, the first round was officially completed, and the red team became the winner. The administrator immediately appeared, congratulating everyone present on their victory, and also on the fact that they had passed the first round. She prepared a small feast for them, setting the table with various delicious foods, saying that they could eat as much as they wanted, but that they were forbidden to take the food outside. After this, most people felt relieved and everyone rushed to eat. However, there were also those who preferred to finally get out of here instead of enjoying a victory feast. The administrator said that they were in no hurry, as it would be enough to listen to the explanation, and after that, they would be able to leave with peace of mind. She also warned them that the world outside was much harsher than they thought, and they would soon find out for themselves, and she would prepare them beforehand. In the first round, the battles took place between ordinary people, but in the future, more and different threats will appear. The rest of the rounds were no different, and in passing, the administrator admitted that she believed in Shion's victory, since it was he who she had bet her luck on. After this, a bright light suddenly appeared, which seemed to blind each of the boys. Then, something strange began to happen to the bodies of those who decided to eat, as if they were about to explode. And this actually happened. The boys' bodies suddenly exploded, to which the administrator said that she had warned them that food should not be taken outside. As soon as Shion opened his eyes, he saw that they had all been transported outside, but everything around him looked rather strange. The administrator also informed them that out of a total population of 8.1 billion people, about 2 billion had passed the first round. The theme of the second round was winter, and the guys had to become the group that would survive. Although humanity has become accustomed to winter, facing it without the benefits of civilization is a completely different matter. From the second round onwards, the boys had to coexist with different monsters, and the first round with the goblins no longer seemed so terrifying. The main goal was to survive in this frozen city, and starting from the second round, artifacts became available. Gifts from the gods that only select players receive, and everyone received an ability from level S to F. Selected players will receive these boxes within a week, starting now. An exception was made for Shion, and he was given the artifact immediately. but he had to wait until the ability was unlocked. From that moment on, the boys' lives changed again, and fighting goblins no longer seemed so scary. After that, they went wandering around the outskirts of the frozen city, trying to find at least something. Meanwhile, Jiyeon suggested that they split up and go separately. She was, of course, indebted to Shion and Jaehi, but since their home was in Seoul, they would be going on their own. After this, their paths diverged, despite the fact that the surroundings were extremely dangerous, and it would have been better to stick together. Jaehi noted that when they finally found Junho, it would be wise to stay in some small building, since in addition to monsters, there were also groups that had taken over the streets. Most of them settled on the streets because, unlike buildings, streets are connected to each other, and the scale of the royal game is simply colossal. There are large gangs operating here, controlled by the so-called street lords. And if you avoid clashes with them in the second round, your chances of survival will be higher. However, even knowing about their existence, the chance of avoiding an encounter with them remains quite small. And of course, we shouldn't forget about monsters that can attack from behind, like the snow nepenthes. It is a monster that hides in the snow and attacks when it spots prey. And it also reacts to shiny objects. Along the way, they also encountered Tun-Tun, these monsters that were more or less friendly and did not attack first. After some time, the guys reached Shion's house, with the hope that Junho was there. Shion asked Jaehi to stay outside, wanting to check everything out for himself. When he reached the door of his apartment, he discovered that it was unlocked, which made him a little wary. Opening the door, he was even more surprised because the first thing he saw was his aunt, and with her, her son, Yeon. Once inside, Shion didn't see Junho anywhere, so he grabbed his aunt and started asking her where his little brother was. She revealed that they were initially together when they moved into their house after theirs was destroyed, but Junho left to look for him 3 days before the end of the first round. Shion began to hate his aunt even more, asking why she didn't stop him. But she only replied that she tried, but Junho didn't listen. Meanwhile, Yeon also intervened in the conversation, saying that children were of no use anyway. Shion stated that he always knew they were trash because when his parents died, the two of them only pretended to be caring, but in reality, they took away the insurance and threw Shion and Junho out into the street. He didn't expect his aunt to be able to protect anyone, but even in such a world, they shouldn't have exposed them to certain death. At that moment, Shion understood why Kyung-soo had given up. It was because this was new to him, and Shion had always thought of this world as hell. So Shion decided that if only the evil ones survived in this world, then he would choose the option to survive. From that day on, Shion knew that he had to stay alive in this evil world, even if he had to become a devil. While waiting for Shiona to return, Jaehi wanted to smoke, but she had no cigarettes left. Soon, Shion returned and declared that he wanted to end this game, and if she ordered him to die, he would die. If he finished, he would finish. In return, he only asked for a promise that she would help him find his younger brother. After this, Shion and Jaehi once again set out to wander the snowy streets, searching for traces of Junho. Since the second round was at the city level, Junho couldn't go far, as the border was close to Anyang, and there was no need to forget about the factions. Shion suggested checking the police station first, then the city hall, since that's where people go in emergency situations. The closest police station to Shion's house was Manhwa Police Station, and he hoped that Junho had gone there. Along the way, the boys came across monsters, and the closer they got to the site, the more of them there were. Coming even closer, they noticed that someone had cleared the snow in the alleys, which meant that someone was there. As soon as Shion and Jaehi walked a little further, they were immediately stopped by a group of people. Among them was Lee Jung-jun, a sergeant at Manhwa Police Station, who demanded that they drop their weapons and come with him. Once inside, Chonjun explained that the situation was critical and that there was a catastrophic shortage of space at the station, in addition to serious problems with water and food. Every day, dozens of people continue to come to the site, and by order of the chief, they are still being accepted. Chonjun admitted that he didn't know how much longer they could hold out, since not all the reconnaissance teams were returning for provisions, and there were fewer and fewer people willing to do so. He then showed the place that Shion and Jaehi could use. The station operated a coupon system. A blue coupon could be exchanged for a trip to the toilet, and a red one for food, and they were given out 1 coupon per day. Since the water supply had long been cut off, police officers melted snow by hand to get water. Living conditions were difficult, but the boys simply had no other choice. After this, Shion and Jaehi went around the area to look for Junho, and it became clear that order was being maintained there with the utmost strength. Everyone around was tense, and the lack of hope made people stingy with even the smallest good deeds. In fact, only the status of the police station maintained the remnants of order. but in secluded places, acts of violence often occurred. However, Junho was nowhere to be seen. However, Shion didn't lose hope. Because this was only the first group, it would be strange to find Junho right away. Jaehi also didn't find Junho, but she brought rations for Shion. Shion had previously planned to leave the station the next morning, but plans changed. He said that he would stay here, because when they listened to Jongjun, a golden window with a quest opened for him. The quest required saving the Manhwa area by raising the citizens' peace to 30%, establishing food supplies, and achieving 100% workforce, while everything was currently in decline. He then asked Jaehi what the achievement points he would receive for completing this quest were. Jaehi explained that these are points that commanders use to issue mandatory decrees, and these quests usually appear in the later stages of the game. In any case, these points were necessary to advance in the league. Jaehi asked if he was confident he could handle this group, since there were almost 1,000 people there. But Shion was not going to retreat. There were about 800 people gathered at the station, and if the ineffective system, in which only police officers worked, was changed, the situation could be quickly corrected. Besides, such a large group would probably already be collecting data on neighboring groups, and Shion decided that instead of useless wanderings together, it would be better to stay here. After all, this way it would be possible to use the group's resources more effectively, and, while completing the quest, be sure to meet with the site manager. The next day, the boys were planning to go with the reconnaissance group. Jongjun was the leader of this reconnaissance group, and hoped that Shion and Jaehi would agree to join them. His hopes were justified. Soon the guys came up and asked to enroll them in the reconnaissance group. Last night, Jaehi was teaching Shion some self-defense techniques, since she couldn't be there to protect him forever. The difference in skill between them was like a chasm, and Shion couldn't even get close to it. Jaehi noted that she had wanted to train him before he had the artifact anyway, but she was still curious as to why he suddenly had such a desire in the middle of the night. Shion told her that they would be joining a reconnaissance group starting the next day, and the most pressing problem at the moment was the lack of food. All the food they have comes from what the reconnaissance team brings, but it is always in short supply. Besides, the group had to have its own leader, and Shion wanted to find him as soon as possible to complete the quest. However, first they needed to prove themselves, which is why they were going to join the reconnaissance squad to help increase food supplies. And to do this, Shion had to be able to protect himself. The next day, the boys joined the reconnaissance squad and went on a sortie with it. Along the way, they also encountered monsters, but thanks to Jaehi's agility, they didn't cause much trouble. Meanwhile, Shion explained to the boys that these monsters are called snow nepenthes, and they are attracted to shiny objects. Jongjun was pleasantly surprised by the guy's skills, because even though they looked green, it was clear that they had already seen a lot. Recently, another problem had arisen. It had become difficult to find food near the police station. But after Jaehi and Shion joined, Jongjun hoped that he would now be able to move forward. Meanwhile, Jongjun announced that they were heading to Anyang's first street today. This street was previously considered the main street in the area, as the area was filled with food and clothing, causing countless guilds to fight over it. This led to the place becoming a kind of cemetery, and also a tasty morsel for monsters. But despite how much everyone was afraid of this place, they managed to get there very quickly and calmly. Inside, they found quite a few useful things, and Jaehi finally found herself a few packs of cigarettes. Jongjun confessed to Shion alone that he was glad they joined the group, because he initially had high hopes for them, but they managed to surpass them. Shion replied that he was pleased to hear this, and was also glad that there would be enough food supplies for everyone today, since many remained hungry. He also noted that he couldn't even imagine the amount of work the police had to do, to which Jongjun confirmed that this was true, but that everyone would be able to eat today. After the reconnaissance group began collecting food on the first street of Anyang, there was a slight improvement in the area. Although it was ordinary food, it was enough to rekindle a spark of hope in the hearts of the people. People finally remembered what it meant to smile, and most stopped treating everyone with hostility. Everyone around began to smile a little, and also to communicate with others, realizing that they were not alone in this evil world. Shion and Jaehi became role models for others, and after that, more and more people from the precinct began to voluntarily join the reconnaissance teams. Jongjun noted that since so many people had joined today, they still had time to visit one place. There was another food storage area on the 4th floor of one of the buildings, and it would be a good idea to check it out. When the guys went up to the 4th floor, they saw several corpses, and this scared them a little. Most likely the first round also took place here, and these were the bodies of those who died in it. However, this was not entirely true. The bodies were clearly not killed by another person. It looked more like the work of a monster. Meanwhile, the rest continued to collect food and various useful things that could be useful in the future. Jaehi noticed something strange about these bodies, as she had seen something similar before. At the moment when the boys let down their guard and began collecting food, they did not notice how something appeared next to them. In an instant, the monster suddenly appeared and attacked one of the members of the reconnaissance group. He instantly tore off a part of his body and absorbed it, just like the previous people. Jaehi ordered everyone not to move, after which the monster began to evaporate and soon disappeared completely. The boys wanted to run away, but Jaehi warned them that if they wanted to live, they had to listen to her and not move, because the entire floor was probably the monster's tongue. The thing was that this was an alligator turtle monster with a wide-open mouth, waiting for the prey to step on its tongue to swallow it. And it itself was always invisible and only revealed itself at the moment of attack. The monster is perfectly disguised as various objects, so even a chair, table, or scissors could be its tongue. The floor, walls, and ceiling could also be part of his body, so the boys were actually trapped in him. Waiting for the monster to leave on its own is also not an option, because such monsters can sit in one place for decades, waiting for prey. Simply put, they were now in a minefield, where anything could turn out to be a death trap. At that moment, Jungjun said that he was ready to sacrifice himself so that the others could escape, because it was he who brought them here and must fulfill his duty as a policeman. Shion immediately stated that he was against such a decision, because when they entered, he saw several bodies, which meant that the monster was probably not alone, and using people as bait was a bad idea. Besides, it's not necessary to use a human to check if they've stepped on a monster's tongue. The exit was about 50 feet away, and although the method was slow, it would be a mistake not to try it. After this, Shion told everyone to tear any clothes they had to tie together a long rope made of cloth. He then tied a tin can to the rope, making a sort of fishing rod to catch the monster. With this improvised tool, Shion planned to reach the exit, but to do so, he needed to hurry. As a result, it took them almost an hour just to gather everyone in one place. And after everyone had gathered, they began to look for a way out. And in 3 whole hours, they managed to take only 10 steps. Of course, this way of getting out of this minefield was too long, but the guys had no other choice. Meanwhile, wind was blowing into the building through the broken windows, making it unbearably cold. And some of the boys were falling off their feet. The monster did not forgive such mistakes, devouring the body in an instant. Moreover, there were far more alligator snapping turtles than the boys expected, and the cold was also becoming a problem. However, there were still about 20 feet to the exit, meaning the escape could take another couple of hours. However, it got even colder at night, and most of them were already at their limit and could fall at any moment. The situation was critical, and Jaehi asked Shion to at least let her try to fight the monster. Jaehi noted that without the artifact's abilities, she wouldn't be able to do more, but the others couldn't stay here either. At that moment, Shion asked her to stop, saying that he seemed to have thought of another way to escape. After all, it would be possible to use not only food for turtles as bait, but perhaps it would be possible to attract snowy nepenthes here with the help of shiny lightning. He asked Jaehi if the snow nepenthes could reach the 4th floor, and she replied that they definitely could. Shion asked Jaehi to throw lightning bolts towards the window after he broke it. Then, telling everyone to duck and get ready, Shion threw the baited rod out the window, hoping the plan would work. His guess turned out to be correct. He actually managed to attract the snowy nepenthes vines to the 4th floor. Now it was not a battle between people and a monster, but between 2 monsters. In addition, we managed to reveal the location of the opponents, and there were only 2 of them. Seeing the opening in the window, Shion jumped in first and shouted for the others to follow him. But he forgot one thing. He jumped from the 4th floor, expecting to fall into the snow and be almost unharmed. But there were snow nepenthes below. Jaehi jumped after him and deftly dealt with the monster's vines. After that, the rest of the guys jumped down as well, and Jungjun was amazed at Shion's intelligence, saying that everyone owed him their lives. At this time, a search party from another group was watching them, surprised at how they managed to get out, especially the young man who jumped out first. They reported this amazing incident to their leader, saying that they had found an interesting young man near the Manhwa police station. The leader of the search party of the Donghat Guild, the first guild in Anyang, was Suen Lee, and upon hearing about the young man, she ordered that the queen be reported first. The Donghat Guild was different from Shion and Jaehi's group, as they even managed to tame the Tuntuns to move around. The first guild, Donghak, had its base in Anyang City Hall, which was indeed a great location for a headquarters. However, the guild itself was quite strange, and they also managed to capture Sebum. The monarch of the first guild Donghak was Park Jisoo, who was known for her rather strange character. Meanwhile, the reconnaissance team returned, and Jisoo was surprised that they were so early, asking Lee if they had found a group of handsome prisoners. Lee replied that that wasn't the case, and a couple of days ago they spotted police from Manhwa investigating Anyang First Street. She added that since this territory is on the border of Donghak and Manghak, they were going to attack them at the crossing. But today they saw who was commanding them. A young man and a girl whom they had not met before. Lee noted that their abilities seemed above average, and besides, the young man turned out to be quite handsome. Jisoo said that this was all interesting, of course, but first they needed to set an example by ordering the execution of all the captured Manhwa police officers and sending their bodies back. At that moment, the guy who was ordered to carry Sebum began to beg for mercy, saying that the previous incident was the fault of their squad leader. Jisoo replied that she knew about it, and although she had nothing against such a small fry, he would still have to die since he violated the edict. The thing is, in the first Donghak Guild, an edict was issued forbidding the mention of the queen's name. And when the guy begged for forgiveness, he accidentally called her by name, which was punishable by death. He began to apologize and beg again, calling her queen and vowing to do everything for her. However, Jisoo did not change her mind. Finding the situation amusing, the police officers who had previously ignored her were now begging for mercy. Jisoo thought the new world was wonderful, because now everything could be achieved with just force. But Sebum was more interested in what was happening to his sister now. Jisoo said that if she had been brought along with him, she would most likely have been sent to work somewhere in Donghak. She added that if Sebum wanted to see his sister, he only had to follow her orders. Although Jisoo was cruel, she showed kindness to those she considered cute, and that was Sebum for her. Moreover, according to the edict, all members of the guild were obliged to obey the orders of the monarch. Otherwise, they faced the death penalty. Realizing that he didn't want to die and dreamed of meeting his sister, Sebum had no choice but to obey Jisoo. Meanwhile, Jisoo also ordered Lee to execute the captured police officers and send their heads back to Manhwa Station. Meanwhile, the reconnaissance group, which had barely managed to survive, finally returned from its sortie. The guys from the area were already waiting to see what Chongjun and his squad had found this time. In fact, everything that was achieved was only possible thanks to Shion and Jaehi, and as a sign of gratitude, Jungjun decided to introduce them to the police chief. Shion was pleasantly surprised as he hadn't expected to meet the police chief so early. Meanwhile, Jungjun took him to the boss's office, and Shion was looking forward to talking to him and continuing the quest. The police chief was Park Gyeon-woo, and he was saying at the time that while they didn't know about the existence of other guilds, if they met them and were able to contact their headquarters, there shouldn't be any problems. Gil Inho, a congressman from Anyang, was also with him, and together they discussed their group's next steps. And Inho noted that if they forced citizens to work, they might get injured, and who was willing to take responsibility for it? Inho stated that limiting their activities is the best policy, and that even if people complain, it is all temporary. Time passes and they calm down again. Therefore, Inho proposed to Gyeon-woo to issue an edict that would empower the monarch of the Manhwa Guild to issue decrees for his guild. At that moment, Jungjun knocked on their door with a report about the reconnaissance group's success. However, Konwoo and Inho continued to talk about their own issues, and Konwoo was against issuing such an edict. Inho noted that they had plenty of problems within the guild, but without using the edict to force citizens to work, various issues would be more difficult to resolve. When Gonwoo saw that Jungjun had brought someone else with him, he became worried and asked him who the young man next to him was. Jungjun replied that he was looking for citizens who could help carry out police duties according to his orders, and here was one of them. He introduced Shion and said that the young man was part of their reconnaissance team and had been of great help in their recent sortie. It wasn't until Shion saw who was in charge of the Manhwa Guild for the first time that he realized why its citizens were suffering. The upper management needed someone to take the blame when things went wrong. Meanwhile, Jungjun stated that Shion has excellent skills and leadership qualities, so he is willing to vouch for him as their civil administrator. Gyeonwoo was quite surprised because, at first glance, Shion seemed too young for such a role. Besides, he was only 20 years old. Shion also told him that he dropped out of school and worked at a construction site before coming to the New World. Inho was not thrilled about this, as he thought the young man was a student and might have some gifted knowledge. But he dropped out of school and worked in construction. Inho also noted that they are currently in a crisis with hundreds of people evacuated, and that to be an administrator, Shion needs to have many skills, such as accounting and logistics. So he didn't quite understand why Jungjun was trying to recommend a young man without any special skills. because if he worked in construction, he would be better off shoveling snow. However, Inho became curious to know from Shion what he would do if they agreed to this adventure and put him in a position of power. Shion began to think about how best to answer and what he could do right now if he promised to do so. However, instead of answering Inho's question, he said that he himself would like to ask them something. After all, as they said, the guild was currently in an unprecedented crisis. So, Shion asked them if there was any reason to neglect civilians by ineffectively using only the police. Jeonwoo replied to Shion that it was about controlling the situation during a crisis based on police guidance, and they were also an organization governed by government policy. Inho also said that the young man probably doesn't understand, but even they can't order citizens to do whatever they want. Shion was once again convinced that neither Gonwoo nor Inho wanted to take responsibility for what they had done, because they believed that the world would return to normal and did not want anyone to have questions for them. He noted that it was most prudent to wait for an official response from the government, and they, like the police, should follow its guidance. However, there is not much time left, and Inho and Gonwoo probably understand this very well. After all, it's enough to look at the food supply to understand that they have big problems. And simply staying in the city, they won't last long. At best, a month or two. Shion also noted that no matter what powers and wealth they had before, it no longer meant anything. It doesn't matter now whether you have accounting or logistics skills, because people around you are dying of cold and hunger. In this situation, the ability to find and return what is most needed is much more important. The young man also understands that it is difficult for them to immediately believe that he can be a worthy civil administrator, but nevertheless, he is ready to prove his worth. And in response to their question about what he could do, Shion stated that he was ready to take responsibility instead of the police. Such serious statements interested Inho, as did the fact that Shion said that his success depended on how much authority he was given. Besides this, it also made Inho and Gonwoo laugh, because these words were similar to those that Gonwoo himself had said earlier. Meanwhile, Inho said that Shion was right. People like them who have things to do are bound by numerous rules and are under surveillance. And it seems like the young man sees right through them. That's why they considered Shion a real rare find. And Jeonwoo was already about to issue a decree appointing the young man. After this, Shion was appointed as the administrator of the first Manhwa Guild, whose authority extends to all members of the guild, excluding police officers or VIPs. Shion was also surprised that monarchs in the second round were able to impose penalties for failure to comply with the edict. Inho also approached him and gave him his first task, to get rid of the cold. The young man realized that Inho seemed to be a very complex person, unlike Kyunhoo, but he was not an obstacle for him. After that, Shion met with Jaehi, and the very hour had come when he could finally open his artifact. The artifact was a Class F sphere with the ability to transport, and to make the artifact appear, all one had to do was say, "Activate." After this, Shion's artifact activated and 3 glowing spheres appeared. Meanwhile, Jaehi explained to him that each artifact has its own class, and although his artifact is classified as F, the worst, it is an evolutionary type, so it is not so bad. These types of artifacts move and develop in accordance with the owner's thoughts. So in order to use the artifact correctly, training is necessary. Moreover, the artifact requires 2 basic skills, the first of which is imagination. But it is not enough to just think about it. You need to use all your senses. And the second is mental fortitude. But this concept is different from the concept of willpower. This determines the amount of time the owner can use their artifact, and it takes a lot of training to develop this sensory concept. This was also the reason why Jaehi herself couldn't use her artifact for a long time. Meanwhile, Shion asked what she meant by artifact training, and she explained it. Jaehi was surprised because, just like in her previous life, Shion was a fairly quick learner. Since there were no problems with mastering the artifact, Jaehi suggested moving on to another topic, his appointment as administrator and the fact that he now had an office. Moreover, he even had his own personal secretary, Kim Soo-kyung, who is also a police officer. Meanwhile, Shion had already managed to assign him his first task, to collect the names of everyone who possessed engineering skills. Shion noted that since the first thing he was asked to do was get rid of the cold, it was necessary to recreate the boiler room. One of the engineers was Lee Jong-chol, 53, a boiler technician, and he didn't understand why they were assembled. But Soo-kyung promised to explain later. However, this approach did not please Chon-chol. The young man gathered everyone, but did not explain anything, perhaps only because he was the main one. And his first impression of Shion was not the best. He considered him to be the same as the police chief. Once everyone had gathered, Shion finally explained that their task was to build a boiler room. But upon hearing this, Chol interrupted him and declared that he would not even begin. He also asked if Shion thought there was any gas or electricity left in this world, and how he was going to start the boiler anyway. Besides, even if they find electricity, there are only a few radiators in the area, which is not enough to heat the room. Shion explained that there was no need to heat the entire building. It was enough to heat just the living floors. Chonchol was even more surprised. According to Shion, he wanted to demolish the concrete floor, but there was no suitable equipment. Shion replied that nothing would have to be demolished. Instead, the boiler would be installed above ground, using the chimneys of nearby buildings. This type of work suited Chonchol better, but the real problem remained with the heating and pumps. To start the heating, it was necessary to heat the water and pump it through the system. However, doing this without electricity is extremely difficult, and Shion was going to solve this problem with manpower. He noted that people could be forced to melt snow and maintain a fire, then direct the heat through chimneys to each floor, eliminating the need for electricity. Chonchol noted that a lot of people would be needed to operate the boiler room, and Shion assured him that even if it was 100 people, everything would work. Be that as it may, everyone will have to make an effort, because no one wants to freeze. However, there were still some details to consider, as they would use hot water for heating, and the steam would need to be properly regulated. Moreover, it was impossible to carry out such a plan without the help of engineers, so Shion bowed his head and asked them for help. At that moment, Jungchol remembered how Gonwoo and Inho had come to him with a similar request before, but they had looked scared. But Shion turned out to be completely different, because he really wanted to solve the problem. As a result, the engineers agreed to help, because their own lives depended on it. Afterwards, Shion asked Soo-kyung if there was anyone among the prisoners who could work, and Soo-kyung offered to take a look for himself. As soon as they entered the cells, there was a noise. The prisoners were shouting with requests to be released. However, among all of them, Shion could not find anyone truly worthy. After inspecting several cells, a man with a strong build appeared. It was Choi Myung-jun, 29, the former second-in-command of the Black Dragon Gang. Shion approached him and asked if he was confident in his abilities, at which point he laughed. Suddenly, he grabbed him by the bars, and he actually had enough force to shake the cell. Myung-jun asked if they would let him out just because he was pumped up. Shion replied that he would release him if he agreed to cooperate. The young man wanted to assemble two groups, engineers to ensure survival, and a boiler room. And the second group are fighters who can protect against monsters and people. But Myung-jun refused, saying that he does not work with those who are weaker than him. Shion replied that it was no problem since they already had someone stronger, and asked if he had no reason to leave. After all, unlike the other prisoners, Myung-jun looked strong and kept his shape and could have strangled him long ago. But he didn't do it. That's why Shion gave him a choice: to go out and cooperate or stay here until the end. He had until the next day to think. There would be no second chance. After that, Shion went around all the floors to assess the situation. And strangely enough, it turned out to be critical. The temperature dropped every day, but at least the food situation was somewhat alleviated. Shion also instructed Soo-kyung to compile a list of everyone who was able to work, regardless of age or gender, by the morning. Soo-kyung was in slight shock because he had to visit about 800 people in one day. Returning to the police chief's office, Shion noticed that everything was as before. The higher-ups were still living happily. Meanwhile, Shion came to them to report on his plans. He soon intends to solve the temperature problem by building a boiler room. He warns Gonwoo and Inho that public access to certain areas would have to be restricted during construction because the risk of damage was too great. In addition, he needs help relocating an entire floor of people, and he would like permission to use the police to do this. Meanwhile, one of the top officials sitting next to Inho asked if it wasn't too much to install a boiler for the people and if they couldn't stand a little cold. Of course, the cold wasn't a problem for them since there was a small heater in Kyunwoo's office. However, Inho replied that they had nothing to worry about as their skilled administrator knew what he was doing and he would take full responsibility. In the end, Shion received permission, but what struck him most was the deliberate inaction of the leadership. While the rest suffered, they sat in the warmth, drinking and eating food. The next day, Soo-kyung, at Shion's request, gathered everyone who was able to work, and out of 856 citizens, 410 were able to work, which was more than enough to build a boiler house. Meanwhile, Shion also instructed Soo-kyung to create a table of all 856 citizens to track their work status by date, preferably taking into account the work criteria. Soo-kyung never ceased to be surprised by Shion's new request, because each of them required a colossal amount of time. After this, Shion came out to the people and announced the start of construction of the boiler house, asking everyone to make every effort for the common cause. However, few people appreciated such a harsh statement, since many wanted the police to do everything, and building a boiler house takes a lot of time. Shion expected this kind of reaction, so he tried to convince the people to take up the task, since their own survival depended on it. He put down a bottle of soju, explaining that its freezing point was 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and at this rate of cold, it would freeze in just 2 weeks. In simple terms, they might not wake up in 2 weeks, so they will have to use all their manpower to prevent this. Shion also told everyone that he was looking for his younger brother, and until he found him, he was obliged to stay alive, no matter what. He was sure that everyone had a reason to live, so he asked everyone for help, because only together they could overcome these trials. His speech inspired people, and they realized that sitting idle meant slowly and surely waiting for death. At that moment, a spark of hope ignited in their hearts, and they all declared as one that they were ready to work for salvation. At that moment, Jaehi began to notice how Shion was becoming more and more like himself from his past life. Ever since Shion announced the start of construction on the boiler house, people have been looking for pipes all over the city. Meanwhile, at the police station, teams led by engineers began to gradually assemble the boiler. While the others were working hard, In-ho and Kyun-ho just watched, as if they had come up with the idea themselves. A week had passed since the start of the work, and according to Chon-chol's calculations, the boiler should be ready next week. But suddenly, the unexpected happened. The conditions for the second round became more stringent, and the cold level increased to the second. An administrator appeared, calling herself a weather forecaster, and announced that the temperature in Anyan was -4 degrees Fahrenheit. She didn't stop there and warned that tomorrow the temperature could drop to -30. After this, the winter became even more unbearable, and people needed time to complete the construction of the cauldron. Because of the cold, many people had difficulty standing on their feet, especially children, who froze and lost consciousness. Moreover, due to the sharp cold snap, 37 people had already died, and another 272 were in serious condition, mostly children and the elderly. Shion noted that they did everything possible to keep them from working, but they had no other option. Since they can't handle heavy work, they can at least boil water for others. In addition, if they were near the fires, they would become warmer, and Shion wanted to arrange for the distribution of boiled water to the workers. As for those working outside, they needed to be protected from the icy wind. They simply had no other way to find temporary rest, except by digging shelters in the snow. These were extremely difficult times, but all this was necessary to complete the construction of the boiler. In addition, in order to somehow speed up the process, Chon-chol suggested simplifying the assembly of the connections. Meanwhile, Myung-jun made a choice to join Shion's team, and was surprised by how skillfully the young man managed people. However, he set a condition: to receive 1 pack of cigarettes a day, otherwise his help could be forgotten. Shion agreed and released him, warning him that the slightest misdeed would send him back to his cell. In fact, Myung-jun had no intention of obeying Shion at all, but wanted to run away with the cigarettes. Meanwhile, 3 days had passed, and the construction of the boiler house was already nearing completion. In the end, the boiler room was ready, and all that remained was to start it up, hoping that everything would go without incident. After this, people were finally able to forget about the bitter cold because they had a place to warm up. This truly brought joy to the residents, and everyone remembered those they had lost to the cold or who had left the area. In-ho and Jeon-woo also came to watch the general success, as if they themselves had a hand in it. But the main hero in the eyes of the people was, of course, Shion, who came up with this idea and awakened hope in their hearts. At that moment, Myung-jun wondered if he had finally found a decent job, since all he had done for the past 3 days was help build the boiler. Shion wanted to move forward with the quest, as civilian comfort and labor efficiency would increase on their own once the boiler was started. All that remained was to establish food production. After all, sooner or later the food supplies they have will run out, and to avoid this, they need to expand into trading areas. But this required a completely different approach, and Shion's next target was Anyang Station. However, this station was quite unsafe, so it was worth preparing properly before heading there. Meanwhile, In-ho was overjoyed at Shion's success, because deep down, he believed that the young man would not be able to achieve any results. In addition, work efficiency increased by as much as 70% in just a couple of days, and Gaeon-woo and In-ho continued their inactivity. enjoying their position in society, while Shion continued to act and was preparing to make a sortie to Anyang Station. As it became increasingly difficult to find food around the area, this became a necessary measure to move on. However, the old method of sending out a reconnaissance group also had its limitations, as there was not enough food even for tomorrow. So Shion's plan was to raise monsters as livestock. Meanwhile, he instructed Soo-gyung to question the newly arrived people, and they reported that they had seen a huge iceman. Ideally, of course, small and docile animals would be best, but most likely you will have to hunt and eat them immediately. And if there really is a monster capable of feeding hundreds of people, it's worth exploring Anyang Station and looking for food there. Other residents noted that the idea of raising monsters was not bad, but as for deer-like animals, that option seemed safer. However, Shion asked everyone to trust him, assuring him that he would do everything possible to ensure that no one would get hurt. However, they faced another problem. There was so much snow that it became difficult to clear the path. But Shion had another option for moving. Instead of walking on the ground, the boys went to climb on the roofs of houses, deciding that it would be safer. Meanwhile, Myungjun's escape also failed, and he ended up going with Shion, but he hoped to escape at night. He was confused, because if this was really an apocalypse, there should have been someone strong in power, not a young man. Besides, Myungjun didn't just want to run away. He intended to find the boss of his Black Dragon gang to gather his people back. At that moment, the boys saw a giant monster, which apparently had been noticed earlier by the recently arrived residents. However, the monster did not attack, but simply passed by as if it did not notice them. Jaehi noted that it was probably an ogre with terrible hearing, which only played into their hands. Truth be told, Tuntuns were the best option. They were plentiful on the streets, easy to breed and tame, and the smaller the monster, the better. However, Shion wanted to tame the huge monster in order to use it as a weapon. Meanwhile, the cold grew stronger every day, and in the area of Anyang Station, the boys were left without food. Moreover, even if they manage to secure enough livestock, they will need armed forces to protect them from others. And to prevent a repeat of what happened in the first round, it was necessary to stock up on food and fighters. Currently, the only ones who had artifacts in the police station were Shion and Jaehi, but it is unknown how many artifact owners there are in other guilds. Therefore, Shion considered the capture of the ogre an excellent opportunity to strengthen his defense and combat power. But Shion was in no hurry to attack blindly. He wanted to gather more information. For example, the ogre hunts 3 times a day and kills its prey before eating it. Several days passed since then, and as it turned out, the ogre was not alone. A whole family lived in the area of the station. Meanwhile, Shion didn't understand why the 4 ogres he could identify had settled here. After all, Anyang Station is too cramped for such monsters, and they all hid something in the basement. That's why Shion wanted to find out what exactly had drawn them here, and he and Jaehi were going to explore everything together. But at that moment, Myungjun asked them to stop and asked if they were really going to the monster's lair. Myungjun didn't understand why Shion let him out of the cell, since he only dragged him around without explanation, and Shion replied that that was true. He considered him a mule, because he was sure that he would run away at the first sign of danger, and that was why he didn't trust him with anything important. Shion noted that he could leave at any time, but if he wanted to stay, he would have to obey. After that, Shion and Jaehi went to the monster's lair to find out why they were gathering there. Meanwhile, Jaehi asked Shion what his plans were for Myungjun, and he replied that he was just testing his character for now. And although it is difficult to communicate with Myungjun, if Shion wants his loyalty, he has no other choice, because he needs an efficient person. Meanwhile, Shion and Jaehi had already approached the basement from where the roar came, although Jaehi assured that the ogres did not wake up at night. Ogres actually only wake up from sunlight, and the rest of the time, they sleep like the dead. After that, the two of them went to explore the monster's lair. It was very dark inside and difficult to see anything, so Shion decided to light the way. So they continued moving along the railway line, exploring the area. Shion became more and more surprised because he didn't understand why such huge monsters lived in such a cramped place. And having gone a little further, he noticed a human face, deciding that he had stumbled upon a lost person. In reality, everything was completely different. Looking closer, Shion saw in front of him a huge pile of naked human bodies. This was the reason why the ogres had settled here, using Anyang Station as their personal storehouse. And yet, it was strange that they had chosen such a cramped location. Walking further, Shion noticed the bones of human bodies, and the further he and Jaehi walked, the more bones they found.
As a result, they came across a sleeping ogre who, fortunately, was not so easy to wake up.
Moreover, Shion decided to climb up the monster to see what was further.
As he climbed higher, he saw that all 4 ogres he had seen earlier were here.
Jaehi also noted that the ogre's most vulnerable spot is their eyes, so they deserve special attention. Meanwhile, it was only 10 p.m. Most likely, the monsters would wake up closer to 3 o'clock, at dawn. And during this time, Shion wanted to find at least a clue on how to try to tame the ogres. The first thing he decided to do was examine their skin, which was rough everywhere except for the area around the eyes, where it was quite soft. Besides, small cuts healed instantly. And as for the sound and pain, they didn't care. In Jaehi's past life, ogres were just a way to get a reward, and no one from humans or guilds tried to tame them. So she wondered if her return had triggered a different chain of events.
Suddenly, a structure collapsed from the ceiling, and with it fell a pile of human bodies hidden there.
In addition, the ogre suddenly began to move, and without expecting it, Shion fell off of it. After that, Shion saw the monster's huge palm approaching him and thought that this was the end.
But thanks to Taehi's quick reaction, serious trouble was avoided.
However, the monster then hit her with part of his hand when she didn't expect it either.
The blow was so strong that the bones in Jaehi's left arm were almost shattered.
However, the ogre itself never woke up, but only rolled over onto its side, causing a lot of damage. Shion was sure that this was definitely a reaction to something, because the movement was too fast for a simple turn, and it had become too dangerous to stay here any longer.
After all, the most important thing now is to save Jaehi, who lost consciousness from the ogre's blow.
Looking at what happened, Shion began to blame himself, because everything that happened was entirely his fault.
That's why he decided to take Jaehi as quickly as possible and escape from the ogre's lair before they woke up.
But there remained one big problem. The way back was blocked by a sleeping ogre.
And as soon as the sun rises, light will begin to penetrate through the cracks in the ceiling. And then, the worst thing can happen.
That's why Shion wanted to prevent this from happening at any cost and get out of this horror.
However, his strength alone was not enough. And after several attempts, he was still unable to climb onto the monster while holding Jaehi. At that moment, sunlight began to slowly break through the cracks. And this meant only one thing: the end.
Shion turned his head and saw before him what he feared most of all: an awakened ogre looking straight at him. But just when Shion thought his life would end and he wouldn't find his brother, Jaehi suddenly stood up and repelled the ogre's attack. Shion didn't understand what was happening and how Jaehi, barely standing on her feet and with a broken arm, continued to fight.
A system window suddenly appeared, stating that Jaehi had activated the Angel Protection effect, and that Shion was listed as its owner. Shion was extremely surprised, not understanding what was happening, and how Jaehi suddenly became a guardian angel. Was that why she was moving even though she was unconscious?
Moreover, he did not understand what the system meant when it called him its beneficiary.
Shion began to wonder if he had done something similar to Jaehi in his past life, but it didn't matter now, since they could die at any second.
So Shion had only one choice left: to order Jaehi to protect him from the ogres.
And strangely enough, it worked. Jaehi seemed to have been replaced, and her previous injuries seemed to have never been there.
As a result, they miraculously managed to escape from the monster's lair, finding themselves on the brink of death.
Jaehi's new skills were simply astounding. Her agility, strength, and resilience increased to incredible levels. After escaping the lair, he ordered Jaehi to immediately go to the police station. But at that moment, the system reported that her guardian angel body's limit had been reached.
After that, Jaehi lost consciousness again, and she and Shion fell down. Shion woke up in the nurse's office at the police station.
She told him that they were brought by a tall man, whose name seemed to be Myung-jun, who ran to the station as soon as he saw a bright flash.
The nurse also noted that she and Jaehi were recovering quite quickly, considering they were only injured yesterday. Meanwhile, Shion immediately began to look for Jaehi, but she had not yet woken up. Although she did not have any serious internal injuries, probably thanks to her artifact. Shion remembered the moment when Jaehi suddenly became his guardian angel, and wondered what kind of monarch he had been in his past life if she had hidden her abilities. He began to wonder if he had really forced Jaehi to protect him even when she was unconscious, and if it was possible to treat a loyal ally so mercilessly.
Or maybe it was necessary in order to reach the final round of the league.
However, he decided to put those thoughts aside for now until Jaehi woke up and do other things. As soon as he opened the office door, he was greeted by a crowd of people, and Shion never thought that so many people would be worried about him, although this was not strange, since it was he who saved them from the eternal cold.
Meanwhile, Soo-kyung tried to push his way through the crowd to tell Shion that he had some urgent business to attend to.
As soon as Shion saw this most irreplaceable thing, he was stunned, because in front of him stood a tun-tun with the heads of police officers attached to its horns. The very same gift from the first Donghak Guild. This infuriated Jeonwoo, and he promised that Donghak would pay the highest price for this.
Meanwhile, Jisoo left them a short letter thanking the Manhwa police for everything they do. At that moment, Shion thought that if the Donghak monarch could tame monsters, then he was definitely not stupid.
This means that they have accepted the League as a new reality and have already begun preparing to destroy other guilds. After this, Shion asked Soo-kyung to urgently call a meeting with Gyeonwoo regarding the matter of taming monsters.
Meanwhile, Gyeonwoo was furious and ordered a task force of police officers to be formed to arrest the criminals from Donghak.
Shion tried to stop him, saying that they shouldn't give in to provocation because they didn't even know what they might encounter.
But Konwoo did not share his opinion and declared that this was not a provocation but a direct war from a bunch of terrorists, ordering Shion to keep quiet and do as he was told.
The rest of the guys supported Gyeonwoo's idea and blindly followed him, carrying out his orders.
However, Shion did not listen to Gyeonwoo and decided to do everything his own way. But first, after carefully assessing the situation, he assumed that if their guild was declaring war so openly, it meant they had artifact users, including the monarch.
This conflict could still be resolved, but Gyeonwoo was determined to resolve everything by force. Meanwhile, Myung-jun was with Shion, and he was surprised that the young man possessed such a modest artifact after all his words. Myung-jun tried to get into Donghak's territory to find out something, but he couldn't get past the snow Nepentos.
He also wanted to fulfill the agreement that Shion had proposed to him at the beginning. But the young man needed someone who would follow orders without asking any questions. Myung-jun stated that he was ready to take on any task and prove that his words were not empty.
Shion assured him that in that case, a suitable task would soon be found that he could carry out. Meanwhile, at the site of the second guild, Ogyeol, which was an intermediate territory between Donghak and Manghak, real chaos was taking place.
Everyone present shouted the name Part Jisoo, and this only made Jisoo happy, calling the League wonderful.
More precisely, she was happy that in the new world one could do whatever one wanted, saying that it was in the name of freedom. But to do this, one needed to capture Manhak and Ogyeol.
Meanwhile, Konwoo gathered everyone to announce that they were preparing a retaliatory war against Donghak's aggression.
At the same time, many began to complain during the roll call, asking to be released back. But this was prohibited until the end of the roll call.
Gyeonwoo tried to lure the rest of the citizens to fight on the side of the police station, but no one volunteered. This surprised Gyeonwoo, because he was sure that in the eyes of the people, he was their savior, giving them food and warm shelter.
He therefore took the drastic measure of declaring that all citizens in the police station would henceforth become part of the civil police, issuing a decree to that effect. And if anyone decides to disobey, a prison cell awaits them. Meanwhile, Shion was monitoring the progress of his special quest, and all that remained was to set up food production. He was also surprised by Gyeonwoo's new decision, because he didn't think that he would dare to do such a thing. However, Shion believed that Gyeonwoo would not attack Donghak right away, and the situation had turned out to his advantage to some extent, as his work had now become 100% more efficient. Meanwhile, Chung-chul came to him and was amazed at how abruptly Gyeonwoo's behavior had changed, since before he had always sat in his office. Jung-chul noted that there was probably a way to negotiate with Donghak, but Jeonwoo only demanded obedience, hiding behind the guise of justice. At the same time, he asked Shion whether he himself would not like to take the place of the monarch, replacing Jeonwoo. After all, in just a month he had already earned the respect of the majority, and would certainly have been better. But Shion replied that no, and hadn't even thought about it. Perhaps it was still worth trusting Jeonwoo. The next day, Jeonwoo organized a training session for all citizens to prepare them for war. The first to join the reconnaissance group led by Chung-jun were new members of the civilian police. The group consisted of 38 police officers and 283 civilians.
Chunjun was surprised because all the faces were familiar to him. These people were working in the boiler room just yesterday, and today they were going to prepare for war. He also remembered how Konwoo read the letter for the first time, and he had already come across Jisoo's name in one of the cases closed by the boss.
Jung-jun didn't know what differences there were between Gyeonwoo and Jisoo, but he knew that with such morale, they wouldn't be able to defeat Donghak.
He also wondered what Shion thought about this, since it seemed like he was busy with something too.
At this time, Inho and Jeonwoo were discussing what had happened, and Inho was surprised by the police chief's abrupt actions. Inko asked him what would happen if someone was killed on reconnaissance and how they would explain it to the leadership.
But Jeonwoo didn't listen to him, and when asked who was next to him, he replied that it was his new secretary, since the officers had a lot of work.
Inko noted that it would have been possible to request special forces from headquarters and make it an official operation, to which Gyeonwoo replied that Inho was wrong to believe in the existence of the headquarters, since the old world had ended. Otherwise, according to him, why is he now acting as if he is allowed to do anything, since he previously believed in the headquarters, and when he received the letter, everything became clear. Shion had also approached him earlier, saying that he wanted to try taming ogres to make them weapons for the guild. Then Jeonwoo told him that he was ready to help with this, and if it would be necessary to feed people to tame the ogre, he could take anyone from the guild.
Meanwhile, Konu also realized that now he wouldn't have to worry about the affairs within the guild, since Shion, whom he appointed as the administrator, would take care of all of that. Therefore, from now on, he intends to live for his own pleasure, as, in his opinion, a real monarch should live. And he advised Inho to prove his worth so that his place would not be taken by someone else. Meanwhile, Jaehi finally woke up after a long time. However, all she remembered was that she and Shion had escaped the lair alive. She was also surprised that she got injured in the second round, since she didn't go back to the past to get beaten up. And so, she decided to go to Shion. When she entered his office, she was quite surprised and asked what he was doing with Myung-jun, and also made a statement. Shion asked to close the door and listen carefully, because what he was about to tell was not part of the quest.
He informed Jaehi that they were planning to overthrow Gyeonwoo, as he had previously assumed that the administrator would start a war between the major guilds, just like in the first round. This was the reason why Shion wanted to find Junho as soon as possible. However, now, Gyeonwoo is playing into the hands of the enemy without a strategy, and wants to use the people as cannon fodder. However, they can't get rid of him right now, because despite the hostility, he is still the chief of police. Besides, he has much more power than they can imagine, so they need to be careful. To overthrow Jinwoo, the people's faith in the police to protect them must be completely destroyed, and by then, Shion will have established his influence.
In addition, many people have already spoken out against Konwoo's policies, which makes it a little easier to overthrow the government. Therefore, Myung-jun will be in charge of the police groups reporting to Konwoo, the unification of the dissatisfied, and their support.
While Jaehi has to protect Shion as always, and also help him train the ogres.
Besides, they need to act as before so that no one suspects anything, and as soon as they get support, they will strike at Gyeonwoo.
Jaehi had anticipated this from the moment Shion said he wanted to stay at the station, but such a well-thought-out plan surprised her.
Shion went to Gyeonwoo to ask for more people, as they were short of labor. If Gyeonwoo gives him about 100 men, he is confident that he will be able to pave the shortest route to Anyang Station and train the ogres.
Gyeonwoo didn't mind and seemed to be starting to go a little crazy.
He even noted that he was wrong to doubt Shion, as he turned out to be much more hard-working than some, hinting at Inho.
At that moment, Inho came in to see them, and Shion thought that something had happened to him, but it turned out that he was fine. Inho himself began to feel hostility towards Shion, which literally came out of nowhere.
He didn't understand why Shion was looking down on him, since he had just returned from a reconnaissance mission too. And couldn't he show a little respect? Meanwhile, he asked Konwoo what they were talking about, since using the monster could lead to casualties.
However, Gyeonwoo replied that Inho had better not bother his head with such questions, since he didn't have a second to spare if he wanted to be useful.
Inko could not tolerate such treatment and left, only saying at the end that he would never forget such humiliation. Gyeonwoo was serious about getting rid of Inho, but that would only cause him unnecessary trouble.
Meanwhile, the police chief really started to go crazy, imagining himself as a god who is allowed to do everything, including harassment.
Meanwhile, Shion continued building the route to Anyang Station, and thanks to the additional labor, the work progressed more quickly.
Once the path is completed, the people will be divided into two groups, scouts and ogres.
The police were unlikely to join the ogres because it was dangerous, so Shion decided to use this as cover for a coup.
However, this was only in words, but in reality, it required people to fight on Shion's side.
That night, Shion and Jaehi gathered to discuss the ogre's training, and Shion suggested that they were responding to sounds and vibrations.
After all, if you remember the moment when the ogre attacked them, simply rolling over, it was strange. Perhaps he did not react because the sounds were at a frequency comfortable for them, and this could be a clue.
At that moment, someone knocked on the door, which surprised Shion and Jaehi as it was already late.
It turned out to be Chul. He apologized for the late visit, but something terrible happened. He did not reveal any details, saying that everything would become clear once they got inside. Upon entering, they saw a dark-haired girl, supposedly the secretary, Jaehi, who had been seen next to Gyeonwoo earlier. Chul said that it seemed like someone had attacked her in her boss's office, and although she remained silent, there were few options as to who it could have been. He also noted that this is far from the first case, and Jaehi is not the only victim. So they asked Shion to intervene. Shion replied that it might be his fault and asked all the guys for help. And the next day, the construction of the route to Anyang Station was successfully completed. Meanwhile, the boys encountered an ogre who chased them non-stop in order to catch, kill, and eat them. However, as soon as they passed a certain point, the monster immediately stopped. This is because ogres have one important feature. They are extremely territorial. They tend to stick to their territory, so Shion and the others' goal was to figure out exactly where their territory began and ended by marking with ribbons the places where they had never seen ogres. And they also forced them to follow them to see where they would stop. And after that, Shion wanted to make the ogres fear them. And the second fact about ogres is that they will attack anyone who enters their territory. The reason for their aggression is quite simple. It's all because in their environment, they maintain a strict hierarchy. Where the strongest ogre is the center of attention, they have a kind of rule. The strongest is right. And so, to show the ogres who was truly stronger, Shion came up with a plan to make them submit. He told the boys to stick shards of glass into the ogres' bodies when they fell asleep. At dawn, when the sun rises, the fragments will begin to shine and thereby attract the attention of the snow Nepentos. They in turn will attack the ogres, and they will have no chance to resist, since they will be chained to the ground. Furthermore, based on the strange sound that Shion had heard in the lair back then, and the pause before the monsters reacted to the noise, the young man was convinced that the sound acted as a stimulus for them. But that remained to be seen. Jaehi noted that, in that case, she would remain to watch the ogres for now, because now that he was their alpha, if the monsters started to behave strangely, she would beat them again. And the third fact that Shion managed to discover is that ogres are quite timid, despite their terrifying appearance. That's why Shion and Jaehi looked like demons in the flesh in their eyes. Myungjun also decided to keep up with the others because Shion had entrusted him with a special task. And to carry it out, he even formed his own special squad, a secret unit of the Manhwa police station, numbering 50 people. At the same time, Kilnu continued to go crazy and do all sorts of strange things. He gathered everyone to announce that a truly horrific incident had occurred within the walls of their beloved police station. A citizen had been harassed and attacked, and he made Inko the culprit for what happened, thereby wanting to get rid of him, and also to show himself in the best light in the eyes of other citizens. Of course, the blinded people believed the words of their leader and began to fiercely hate Inko, demanding that he be expelled or even killed. Ino was confused and didn't understand why the girl didn't tell everyone that it wasn't actually him, but Gyeonwoo. In the end, Gyeonwoo only told him that his time of influence had come to an end, and he also admitted that all this time he had irritated him because he had acted like a monarch. However, he still allows him to keep his gold congressman's badge. Perhaps he will need it to demand special treatment elsewhere. Inho was horrified and couldn't believe that Gyeonwoo had turned into such a person. Or perhaps he had always been like this. After this, he was sent bound to wander the snowy streets, and Inho did not lose hope that perhaps he would meet someone who would save him. But he completely forgot that he was wearing a shiny congressman's badge, and shiny objects attract snow Nepenthes. However, after a few minutes, people began asking each other whether the congressman was really guilty, but they were immediately dispersed by the police. Shion expected Gyeonwoo to get rid of Inho, but he didn't think he could frame him so easily. And meanwhile, he wanted to use this situation to carry out a coup. He also asked Myungjun not to provoke anyone directly, as Gyeonwoo might issue more edicts, which would become a big problem. Myungjun replied that everything would be fine. He would just stir everything in the pot a little, but in such a way that no one would know. The next morning, one of the policemen burst into Gyeonwoo's office without even knocking. This took him quite by surprise, since he had previously asked not to enter his room without knocking. And in the meantime, he asked what had happened that was so serious. And as soon as he saw the reason for such a sharp challenge, he was furious. He didn't understand who dared to do something like this, because he does everything for the citizens, provides them with comfort and food. Moreover, some people started spreading rumors that it was actually Gyeonwoo who was at fault, not Inho. Upon hearing such rumors, Gyeonwoo ordered that such people be immediately arrested and put into prison. After this, he stated that any act of violence against the police would be considered a direct challenge to his authority, and if someone did not like something, they could voluntarily leave his station.
However, Myungjun was not worried about this. Moreover, he was confident that he and his squad would not be discovered, since they acted quite covertly. Meanwhile, Shion began training the ogres, while Myungjun and the others were causing an internal rebellion among the citizens and the police. And his theory that the ogre reacts to a sound at a certain frequency was confirmed, which the young man was certainly happy about. In addition, he rewarded the ogre with food for good results, to make the taming process more enjoyable for him. As a result, a tactic was developed. Jaehi paralyzes the ogre with powerful blows, then the snow Nepentos pin him down, and then Shion trains them.
Suddenly, a status window appeared in front of Shion, stating that the ogre dungeon had been cleared and their territory, Anyang Station, had been unlocked.
In addition to all this, Shion gained access to hidden food supplies, thereby ensuring a constant source of food and fulfilling the final condition of the special quest.
And in the meantime, he also received a new special quest: Revolution.
After that, he went to Gyeonwoo to tell him that they had managed to find a new place with food, which he was certainly happy about.
Moreover, he was pleasantly surprised to learn that he had actually managed to find a way to tame the ogres.
However, he was also upset that they couldn't force the ogres to attack right now, as that would have allowed them to deal with Donghak faster.
Shion asked Gyeonwoo if anything had happened during his absence, as there was some tension in the air. Gyeonwoo told him that the night patrol officers had been attacked over the past few days.
So he decided to evict some citizens, naming them as the culprits to set an example, although he was not sure whether it was them. Shion, however, said that right now he wasn't sure if they could afford to worry about people's reactions. However, when Shion said that they shouldn't worry about people's reactions, he didn't think that Gyeonwoo would take his words that way.
As a result, a couple of days later, a guillotine was created. Then Shion realized how cruel Gyeonwoo really could be.
Shion began to think that perhaps this had been Gyeonwoo's plan all along, and he had simply been testing it all this time. Moreover, there was no warning about this decree, and if someone died by guillotine, it would result in people losing all faith in the police. And of course, the first thing the citizens did was ask Shion to become their new monarch and overthrow Gyeonwoo from power.
Shion also wanted to overthrow Gyeonwoo's power before he executed anyone, and this was also the first condition for completing the new quest.
Sookyung also began to suspect that Gyeonwoo was gradually losing his mind and doing rash things. The other police officers also did not try to object to Gyeonwoo, thinking that everything would be fine and that he wanted to maintain order with this. Sujun didn't understand at all what had happened to the site in such a short time, and meanwhile, he was heading to the chief's office to hand over the papers. But when Sookyung came closer to the office, he saw a girl he didn't know trying to get out of there, asking for help.
Someone then grabbed her by the hair and dragged her back into the office, but the security guards outside the office did not react to this.
That someone was none other than Gyeonwoo, who had lost the last drop of his humanity and forgotten all the rules and norms of society. But Sookyung decided not to remain silent this time, and not turn a blind eye to what was happening, and ordered Gyeonwoo to let the girl go, otherwise he would arrest him. The young man had completely forgotten that Gyeonwoo had recently issued a decree forbidding disobedience to the monarch's orders, and the punishment for this was death.
Suddenly, some kind of dark force enveloped Sookyung's body, but it didn't seem like they were just trying to grab him.
The dark energy compressed him so much that his body simply exploded like a bomb. The guards continued to watch this silently, and meanwhile Gyeonwoo ordered them to remove traces of the corpse and make it look as if a civilian had killed him. After this, the police found a man who could be blamed for the murder of Gyeonwoo, and to serve as an example to others, they guillotined him.
Gyeonwoo continued to act as if everything was fine, and all his actions were normal. However, the citizens were tired of putting up with such antics, and declared that they would leave the station and join the Donghak Guild. After the death penalty was carried out in full view of the entire population, many were seriously considering leaving the station, and Shion knew he had no time to sit it out any longer. Myungjun also approached him and said that they were just waiting for his command to start the coup. But first, Shion and Jaehi went to Gyeonwoo's office. The young man felt even more hatred towards him, looking at how he ate all the most expensive foods, as if nothing was happening, and the world was the same as before. Jinwoo suddenly started talking about who was the first human being born, and the answer was a monkey that lied. This is because the desire for something is a pure animal instinct, And lying is the first step in developing a strategy for personal gain. It's like trying to keep everything for oneself by demanding a bigger piece of the pie. And for this, a person is willing to do anything, using others as pawns, just to get what he wants. Jeonwoo called this the beginning of humanity. He also believes that the League will mark the beginning of a new era for humans, and from now on, they will simply kill to get ahead of others. And once he began to see things this way, it was like he had an epiphany. He realized that stepping on others to get ahead is human nature. He also asked Shion what he thought about it, but he replied that he wasn't quite sure about it. However, Jinwoo told him that he still liked him, like the nephew he never had. After all, he was the one who solved the cold problem, established food supplies, and even trained the ogre. And Chunwoo also knows that he won the hearts of people with his work, and the only thing he wasn't sure about was whether the young man would be able to rule an entire guild. But after his words about how they didn't have to worry about people's reactions, it reminded him of himself in his youth. Shion replied that he seemed to be too kind to him, and in the meantime, asked him what had happened to Officer Soo-gyung. Without even trying to lie, Jeonwoo immediately confessed to killing him, saying that he had behaved inappropriately. Meanwhile, Jeonwoo wanted to offer him a drink, but looking up, he saw that Shion had already finished his glass of wine. After this, Shion offered to play chess with him. The young man was unrecognizable. It was as if he had been replaced. Jeonwoo pointed out that he wasn't very good at chess, and Shion told him that chess was a game of kings, so he should play with him. However, he didn't mind playing since he considered Shion his friend, but in reality, he was just buying time. After all, before this, he gave the order to Myung-jun to act, so now everything depends on what he has in mind. At the same time, the police station was very quiet and at the same time noisy. It was time for Myung-jun and his squad to show themselves. Pretending to be asleep, they waited for the right moment to attack the police. The guards never expected such a sudden attack, and Myung-jun's plan worked. Another security detachment was also sent to help them, but Myung-jun had foreseen this. He told one of the guys to stand at the exit so that when reinforcements arrived, he could kill everyone with a hammer. But things went a little differently. But even so, this did not mean that Myung-jun's plan had failed, because there were still quite a few guys. Meanwhile, the police did not waste time and immediately defended themselves with shields to keep them from getting close. Some of Myung-jun's squad began to doubt whether they could really stand up to trained police officers, but he simply told them to simply follow his example. Besides, they also shouldn't forget that these so-called police officers killed an innocent man by guillotine without any trouble. So how are they any different from bandits? And we must not forget that if they retreat now, they may not wake up tomorrow. That's why today the guys are fighting not against the police, but against those who have set their sights on their lives. They didn't care who was in front of them, a policeman with a gun or a shield, because their hatred was much stronger. The police thought they could win by using guns, but Myung-jun didn't care that the knife was stuck in his leg, because he used to be in the Black Dragon gang. Although Shion asked him not to bother the police unnecessarily, but only to buy time, since their target was Gyeonwoo, Myung-jun couldn't help but show who was the boss here. Meanwhile, Shion and Gyeonwoo continued playing chess, and the police chief was so drunk that he seemed like part of the board. Shion also drank enough and gradually forgot why he came to him in the first place. However, he managed to check Jeonwoo and finish the game. After this, Jeonwoo, as if feeling relieved, lost consciousness and fell face down on the board. Shion immediately tied him up, and Jaehi made sure that no one else entered the office. At that moment, a man burst into the office to urgently report to Jeonwoo about what was happening. He was surprised to see Shion tying up Gyeonwoo and Jaehi standing next to him with the activated artifact. Shion did not explain anything, but only said that now they had a choice: to recognize the new monarch, or remain loyal to Jeonwoo and die here and now. Everyone chose Shion without hesitation, realizing that they would not live long with Gyeonwoo. Thus, the plan to overthrow the monarch was already on the verge of success. The administrator watched everything that was happening with interest, surprised by such a sudden change of events. Suddenly, Administrator Ji approached her, declaring that nothing was happening in her East Asian region and that the higher-ups might find out about it. She replied that everything was fine because what was happening now was what the top brass loved most. The day after the coup, there were two things left to do: remove the bodies of the dead police officers, and deal with those who served Jeonwoo for the sake of privileges and not out of conviction. The second task was more difficult: deciding what to do with Jeonwoo and how to take the monarch's throne. When Gyeonwoo was brought out to the square for the sentencing, many demanded his execution. Shion asked the citizens to pay him some attention,
as the future of their guild was at stake. It became clear to everyone that the old world no longer existed, and that waiting for salvation from the government was pointless. They had found their way, and now they need to continue living at the same pace because it was their tenacity and adaptation that allowed them to survive. But Gyeongwoo decided to slow their progress by building a guillotine and executing innocent people on trumped-up charges. Therefore, Manhaku needs a new monarch, and Shion, taking this position, will establish a new order. These words lit a spark of hope in the hearts of the citizens, and they rejoiced that they now had a different leader. Meanwhile, Jaehi changed her hairstyle in preparation for new fights, because the real league was just beginning. Suddenly, the administrator appeared and reminded that the title of monarch could only be obtained by killing the previous one. Shion was surprised and asked if they were just using the rules as an excuse to kill. The administrator said that since he had come so far in 6 months, she would give him a chance. It was a chance to become a monarch through democratic means. All citizens had a system window in which they could vote for or against, and 90% of the votes were needed. Voting began immediately, and the administrator awaited the result with interest. Before K went to the people, Jae remarks that it was as if he had met Shion before. At the same time, K was thinking about how to make the second round even more brutal. However, Jae noticed that the young man named Shion was trying to avoid any violence. He already had a chance to kill the monarch and take the throne, but he did not do it and did not even mention execution. Jae wondered if Kay was wasting her time, but she assured him he was unique. However, the elite wanted Kay to prove that he was worthy of being monarch. While she was carrying out the order, she mocked him a little, but he showed himself worthy. As a result of the vote, all 851 people voted for Shion, and he became the new monarch of Manhwa. Soon, he received many letters from other monarchs interested in the cauldron and other solutions. Shion was surprised and asked Kay what it all meant, and what it meant to be a monarch. She said she would answer all the questions, but first she wanted to know why he didn't kill Konwoo. Shion replied that the execution would not change anything, but he knew how Konwoo could still be useful. He ended up sending Gyeonwoo as a gift to Jisoo from the Donghat Guild, and she was genuinely happy. Therefore, Jisoo decided that it was possible to postpone the attack on Manhwa for now. About half a year has passed since Gyeonwoo was overthrown and Shion became the monarch. During this time, much has changed. Trade began, and the problem with food disappeared. Ogres also ceased to be bloodthirsty monsters in the eyes of others, turning into a means of transportation. Jaehi continued to train diligently and greatly improved her skills, reaching S rank. Shion also tried to keep up with her, but so far he was only able to reach D rank. But he needed to succeed in training, because the long-awaited war between the guilds would soon begin.